Good afternoon and a very warm welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed our homemade ditty. We decided to use AI and a few words to create our music, which is made by a man just at the back of one of our team members, so I hope you liked it. We think it hopefully becomes part of our brand. I'm not sure it will, but it's great. It's uplifting. My name is Dharmendra Kanani. I am Chief Operating Officer and Chief Spokesperson at Friends of Europe. I feel as if there's an echo to me. Is there an echo to me? Can you all hear me perfectly? Lovely, excellent, great, good. Okay, so welcome to this a forum on, as we say, AI and Society 2024. Actually, we should get rid of the date. It should just be AI and Society. What we want to be able to do today in the next 3 hours is, I suppose, slice up two particular drivers of change that are going to affect us into the future, and that is our future of work, how work will map out the skills, the industrial agenda, and how the two will be fused by AI. What are the implications? What should we be doing? What should we be thinking about? And we have an august panel of folk, 2 online, 3 in person, who are going to debate these issues from their various vantage points as people who have got experience in looking at the future of work, people who have been looking at how countries are adapting to AI, etc. and so forth. So you'll get the opportunity to interact with them. And then we move into a session later on about democracy and the implications for AI and democracy. And as you know, this year, it's probably been the kind of festival of disinformation, given the number of elections. We've had the highest number of elections this year. People go to the polls all over the world, and we can see right now, we've seen already in this past 6 months, how AI has generated disinformation and has skewed things in different ways, and something that we need to be mindful of and careful about. So that session will discuss what should we be thinking about doing and doing right. What we do know is people are positioning AI as the god of everything, and it can be, as long as the algorithms and those who feed it do not repeat the inequality, the inequity, and the disadvantage in our current social model. And that's the question here. How do we make sure that whilst it can be a force for good, AI can also be a force for bad? And you know that already. And so we need to be thinking that actually, perhaps you don't have to take an unfettered approach to AI. Let's make sure we are responsible with it and ensure that it's future-focused, but creating a social model that's based on equity, social justice, improved social mobility, greater competition and fairness across the board. A tall ask, I know, but I think we can do it if we are all to collaborate. But at the end of the day, the issue will be politics and the boldness of politicians, the desire of those who are doing stuff in the space of technological advancement to come together with government, if you like, to do the right thing. There's one very important, I wanted to just quote this one fact. The IMF says almost 40% of global employment, so 40% of global employment is exposed to AI. That's now. Right? That's just now. That's not taking account of the pace of AI development that's happening right now across the world. And let's not forget, at the moment, the US is the big brother in this. They have the largest companies. They're the ones who've got the most foundational AI technologies in the world. They account for 65 to 68% of cloud management and access. So just imagine for a moment what that says about Europe's role. We've had the Draghi report talking about competitiveness. And I suppose the questions in our mind must be, have we lost the game? Or are there ways in which we can up our game and make things better as a whole? But there's a reality to those numbers. One is the impact, and the other is who has the greatest market share. Without a shadow of a doubt, it is the US. And they have 3 of the biggest hyperscalers in the world that basically account for 3/4 of the cloud. So just to put our conversation in context. So we are waiting for one of our speakers, because Abigail, I think that she's just on her way. But I'm going to start with Jens. Jens, thank you for joining us. Jens is from Workday. They've been doing a number of things that are at the forefront of how you think about machine learning, AI, etc. and so forth, and developing technologies. And also thank you as a partner to this debate, which we're very pleased that you're able to work with us in this way. Can you share some of the technologies that you're developing? What do we need to know about that you're doing? And given the role of Workday, what role can you play in closing the skills and opportunity gap?
Thank you very much, and thanks to Friends of Europe for organizing the event, and to all of you for being here. We're very happy to be able to support this discussion. It's coming at a very opportune time with the Draghi report, with President von der Leyen's priorities now set out in the letters to the commissioners designate. So a headline theme for both Draghi and Mr. Draghi and President von der Leyen is the need to boost Europe's competitiveness and prosperity. And to do this, we need to provide our citizens and our companies with the best and most advanced digital technology, including AI, and we need to help our workforce upskill and reskill and tackle skills and labor gaps. So we very much agree with these goals as a leading provider of cloud applications for companies, for enterprises. We're a global company, and we serve some 2,200 companies headquartered in Europe. So let me first talk about our approach to AI and how we use the technology to help our customers and their employees become more competitive, more productive, and more effective. So we've built AI capability into the core of our technology platform for almost a decade. And our latest offerings use AI in 3 key ways to accelerate, and that's about working faster and smarter, making employees able to save time and focus on more important work that drives innovation and growth. So faster and easier by using AI to automate routine tasks. Second, assist. So this goes beyond automation. It's like having an AI expert by your side, helping with complex tasks, navigating complex processes, providing guidance and improving decisions. And then finally, transform. So where capabilities are not just about automation, but empowering people to achieve more, and in some cases, completely transform business processes. So for example, in the HR area, to be able to reduce the recruitment process by 50%, or make CFOs able to close the books in half the time that they are currently using. So this is what generates productivity and competitiveness for our customers. So, and so in the way that we think about AI and develop AI, we think about customers, the companies, and we think about employees. It has to work for both. And we all know that people will not use technology that they don't trust. It has to be trustworthy. And so we have, at Workday, well before the AI Act was proposed, we set up a program dedicated to developing ethical and trustworthy AI based on a core set of principles. We have a responsible AI team that is really working the product development process from the beginning to launch, to product launch, to make sure that we take into account any risks that emerge. And so, based on our principles, we have consistently supported regulation to ensure that AI is developed and deployed responsibly. So we participated in AI policy making in the EU with the AI Act, the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, Singapore, Japan, and we continue to do that. Just yesterday, we were proud to be one of the companies signing up to the European Commission's AI Pact. This is a voluntary pledge to proactively implement the key parts of the AI Act requirements. And there is a need to build trust. We put out a survey earlier in the year showing clearly that both at the executive level and with employees, there is a trust gap, and people don't necessarily have confidence that these technologies are going to be used in ways that are productive for them. So policymakers have responsibilities in terms of setting guardrails. Organizations have responsibilities in terms of governance of AI. Let me now talk quickly about skills and human capital. So matching the right skills with the right opportunities is critical. The Draghi report emphasizes that this is an issue for about half of European companies of different sizes, that skill shortages are exacerbated by the misallocation of skills within companies as well. So in this context, it is we think it's important for organizations to adopt a skills-first approach. So this, in a nutshell, means focusing on people's competences and relevant experiences rather than formal job titles and credentials. So we think this is a vital piece to enhancing competitiveness, but also to make labor markets more inclusive and provide more opportunities. And we have technology that we use to help our customers manage skills gaps within the organization. We call it Skills Cloud. It's a data ontology that breaks down components of skills and connects those components in relation to other skills and relates them to other categories. And so by using these tools, our customers can do better workforce planning, recruiting, and ensure that there's internal mobility, create opportunities for employees. So it addresses skills shortages because it puts a spotlight on skills that employees or prospective employees might not otherwise have surfaced. And so we think this type of approach can both help companies manage skills gaps and manage their reskilling and upskilling, and it can help employees benefit from education and training, personalized and connect with new opportunities. So, as the Commission prepares to renew its focus on lifelong learning and workforce upskilling and reskilling, we're certainly eager to contribute our expertise and partner with policymakers. So we've supported initiatives like the EU Pact for Skills, Cybersecurity Skills Academy, and we run several training and skills programs with partners at local level. And we continue to look for opportunities to contribute as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. That's very, very effective and helpful and sets out the kind of role you play. I have a couple of questions in mind which you don't have to answer right now, and I want you to think about this as well. That some of the approaches that we've taken to regulating digitalization has been elective. I'd be really interested in your views whether this should be mandatory or should people elect to do the right thing? Do you trust people to do the right thing? So I'm really interested in your views on that. We canvass, we have a citizen engagement lab, if you like, at Friends of Europe, and we canvassed and engaged in a deliberative exercise last year with 2,024 citizens across 7 key markets in Europe. And we asked them about AI. And a majority of them said that they see it as a mixed blessing. They can see the opportunity, and they can see what it might be for them, but they don't trust people to do the right thing, and they think it might have been left too late to actually catch up on the AI revolution. So that's from kind of 2,024 citizens across Europe who feel that way. And the last point is, when we think about the skills agenda, the training agenda, what do we do about the digital capability and literacy divide? And what I mean by that is at least 50 to 45% of people that actually don't have the capability or the literacy skills to engage in this revolution and will simply go like that and just move on and not care or not understand the implications of how AI is shaping their lives. Just things that we ought to think about. You don't have to answer that right now. I'm going to move on to Veronique. Thank you very much for being with us also. Yeah, I'm going to take a member state approach. So here we have someone in the ministry in Luxembourg involved in vocational skills, education, young people, etc. Now, Luxembourg has created an interministerial committee on the issue of AI. And looking at, I suppose, improving, dusting out their strategy and making a new one. So, Veronique, can you say a little bit about the approach you are taking, and what do you see as the challenges or the things that we need to be really bearing in mind in terms of skilling up a future workforce?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to put that in the context of the OECD study we made. We had already a skills gap and mismatching before the spreading of AI in the workplace. So it was even during the pandemic that we made together with OECD, which the Center of Skills guided us. We made a national skills strategy that was published in 2023, April. So AI was already a subject, but not to that point it is right now. In this skills strategy, we worked all together. We had our ministry was in charge of the coordination, And we had an interministerial group steering this study together with the OECD and the help of the European Union. And there were a lot of discussions, interviews with the stakeholders, so to be sure from the beginning that everybody was on board. I think that's something very important. And the main conclusions to the state, to where we are right now, is that in this study we had 4 main priorities: to offer more relevant, qualitative, high trainings relevant to the job market. The second was to improve orientation of adults and overview the incentives to upskill and reskill. And as we are a very small country and we are dependent on workforce coming from abroad, so talent attraction and retention was a great subject too. And very important, the governance of skills data. And there our national employment agency made really a great work using already AI. So making sectorial studies, but they were obsolete to a certain point very quickly, because there was, for example, in the construction sector, there was a crisis. So there was less need for well-skilled workers. So they went over to a system to have a really good dashboard with analysis built up upon the job offers, and it's jobs inside insights.lu if anybody is interested. So that's already a very good progress concerning the skills data. We have, on the other hand, we had an AI strategy that was from 2019, so that was much too early for generative AI. And there's an interministerial working group, and I think by the end of the year, the new strategy will be presented. But that doesn't mean that we have no initiatives. For example, we ourselves, we have some training centers, and we offer the new format of training offers, the skills bridges, just to fill the gap. And they are of different sorts, in green skills, but also on AI for administrative employees. And that has a very great success because it's very practical. It's the theory, it's the ethical questions, because I think they have to be mentioned to a very great extent. And then using an own example, so doing a project by yourself. I just want to finish with a CDFOP study which was made this year. They made a greater story, and they wanted to know about the use of AI right now. And they had a study over 11 countries, and having a sample of 5,000 people, so it's quite okay from the statistical point of view. And in Luxembourg, the answer was that 40% of the people they had on this survey used already AI in their jobs. So we are a very service-oriented economy, so I think this explains it. And when you come to the need for training, because there is some anxiety, I think you mentioned it already, everybody is a little bit afraid of the progress, and the progress is very rapid. So 60% of the people all over the countries wanted to be accompanied by, to have reskilling and upskilling with AI. So I think that's a very important message, and I don't think that it's in 11 countries, but I think it's the same in all over Europe. So I think that's a challenge for the next years to have an AI strategy and to take people, employers and employees together on the way using AI and using it in the right way.
Veronica, thank you very much. Can I just ask you, is your approach, and I didn't hear this clearly from you, is your approach a kind of a whole life cycle approach to AI development? So from, let's say, nursery, primary education, right through to how older people in the workplace retrain and reskill? Is that the kind of approach you're taking?
There was an Erasmus project for secondary education, for example, where Luxembourg participated, AI for teachers. And there is already, they are working, the training teachers from the primary school and the secondary school to know AI, otherwise their pupils know, and to use it, for example, for being more inclusive. We have a lot of different nationalities in our schools, so their AI can be very helpful. So to show teachers how they can use AI to be more inclusive. And to that extent, I think it will be a whole society approach, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, see what you make of what you've heard so far and what the questions in your mind. I should have said this at the beginning, that please don't be a passenger in the room. You're not going to get these hours of your life back, so engage, and if you don't, I'll pick on you to have a conversation with you, because why waste this opportunity of all these brains in the room that we can engage with and share your concerns, your views, you might have ideas, because the whole point of this debate is that, I suppose, asking a really strategic question, is the Commission going in the right direction on this agenda? Yes or no? Do you think they should do something better? Could they be more innovative? Or what's your view on some of this? And we really want to hear from you on that. I believe we now have Abigail online. Is that right? I can see.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Lovely. I'm glad you could make it, because I'm really you're the co-director of the Institute for the Future of Work. So we wanted to start off with you, Abigail, in this right. I want you to go, we've been having a discussion with Workday and then taking a Luxembourg example. Now let's zoom right out in terms of the economy. So what I'm interested to hear from you is that how is the economics impacting AI? How is the economics of how we structure ourselves affecting AI? And what should we be worried about?
That's a great introductory question. I suppose at the Institute for the Future of Work, we try and look at things at the level of labour markets and kind of structural transformations to the nature of jobs as they're distributed across the economy. Transformations to firms, the way that they are organising work, the way that they're structured, the way that they maybe allocate work across different countries and regions. And then also at the individual level about how workers are experiencing transition, and really there is one thread that connects these together, and that is the approach that's taken to how you secure productivity gains with the adoption of these new technologies. Those different strategies that can be taken by firms, ultimately, who are the kind of nuclei of this transformation as it happens in practice. Those different strategies have different impacts for job quality and the availability of jobs, but also for the nature of work at the level of our society, and I suppose as the kind of social glue that bonds us, but also, the productivity returns that we get at the aggregate scale. So in a recent piece of work that we did for the Pissarides Review into the Future of Work and Wellbeing, which is a kind of 3-year study that's taking the UK as a case study to look at what the impacts of cognitive automation, so automation that's led by information technology, although obviously a lot of manual transformations in robotics are still led by developments in information technology, what the different types of automation are in practice, because often in significant reports and in the kind of economics literature, there's still a focus on 2 particular types of automation impact. One of them is displacement, this fear around loss of jobs, and another is this broad sense of augmentation, which is, or sometimes referred to as complementarity, where people remain in a position and work with the technology. But something that we've discovered through doing all of this extensive qualitative research into practice is that there are actually a range of different types of automation, range of different routes to securing productivity gains, beyond just the complete displacement of a role, and this other broad bucket where someone stays in work but they are working alongside these new technologies. And if we want to think about the economics of it and also good work at the same time, then we should begin to pay more attention to what those different archetypes of automation are. This is also important for policy. So beyond the creation of new jobs, the displacement of jobs, we're also interested in how phenomenon like matching are transforming work. So we know that in the gig economy, the ability of technology to kind of collapse information asymmetries and match workers with jobs is a common phenomenon. It's also happening in hiring. Increasingly, it's also happening within businesses as workers are allocated to tasks, even though they're still in full-time contracts. Obviously, the avenue that businesses have to secure productivity through matching may be a move towards gig work, the removal of standardised employment protections. That's the kind of one of the avenues for revenue generation within that particular paradigm and use of technology. Alternatively, we think it's important to kind of distinguish between high discretion augmentation and low discretion augmentation. So while there's a common assumption, especially in policy circles, that the adoption of technology will lead to upskilling of work and then also hopefully better pay and compensation as linked to that upskilling, in practice, augmentation, this kind of augmentation of a worker, can take different directions. There are instances where choices about how the technology is designed, developed and deployed by an organisation can lead workers to use their own human skill and discretion more, and that may put them in a bargaining position where they can be better compensated. However, it's also commonly the case that technology is being designed, developed and deployed in ways that might substitute key aspects of decision-making about a role, in ways that ultimately mean that a worker has less discretion, maybe changing their job quality, autonomy, dignity, but also that lead them to need to have contribute less human capital to a kind of process, which means that ultimately somehow the design of the technology and approaches to its deployment in the interim period can reduce the kind of bargaining power of labour and also their significance to the kind of production process. So we think about these and a set of other archetypes in this reframing automation paper to kind of prompt both employers, worker representatives and policymakers to understand that we propose 7, but there are undoubtedly more, different avenues to designing, developing and deploying technologies which have different types of productivity benefit, and that will also play out to have aggregate social effects and also aggregate economic effects.
Abigail, thank you very much. What I'm left thinking about is that who's got a grip on this agenda? Who should lead it? Is it a government-led thing that should be happening? Given that you are the Institute for Future of Work, share with us where you think the stuff that needs to happen is happening well. That's one. Mm-hmm. And if not, what's your take on what the Commission or a government should be doing on this? Because it sounds like there's something that's a kind of an uncontrollable feast that's taking place, which is AI, right? And you've got private actors innovating, and government doesn't really understand the scope of that, the breadth of that, and the speed of it. Share from your work you're doing, because you've given us this kind of typology, but really want to understand from you who's got a grip on this and what should be the role of government.
Mm-hmm. Well, it feels like an abusive position to respond with some activity that we're doing, but I think this is exemplary maybe of a model that could reflect a good way of working. It's certainly the case that we need more adaptive learning systems as models of the development of governance, and there are some ways I think that the UK ecosystem has got that right, although there obviously has been a delay on regulating some of the key risks, and that's probably another conversation to come into. But at the Institute for the Future of Work, we have created a sandbox, and obviously that means something, well, not obviously, but it means something quite different to us than the kind of way that they're being developed in the European context. But we think that there's these kinds of environments that are research environments, but also support environments for organisations to think through how both their aspirations for the way that a technology would change work, but also how that comes into dialogue with different legal regimes that already exist, be that employment law, be that different types of data protection, how those things kind of coalesce, and the ways that businesses can practically operate in different regional contexts even, to implement and follow those, as well as sectors. That kind of insight from practice of trying to comply with different models of future regulation or governance can be really great sources with the most cutting edge technology, can be a great source of insight to feed back into the kind of regulatory ecosystem, work out what makes for effective regulation, a kind of experimental approach to governance in the first instance. So I think probably we need more collaborative architectures for understanding these things, but those which also centre worker voice and experience. So for the kind of, I suppose, on the Gartner hype cycle of new technologies, maybe more of these kinds of collaborative architectures that are looking at what their implementation in a real world firm context would look like, engaging workers in that process who are experts and have strong domain expertise in thinking about what the implications of a technology would be, to then do some of the kind of forecasting and practical evaluation of what it would mean to implement this in practice, is one model that we could think about in terms of having more preemptive but also informed governance of these technologies in practice.
But who should, so I'll go back to my question, should we just let the marketplace determine that collaborative practice, or should it be led by government?
I think we're seeing there's definitely a need for joined up and collaborative work across different regulators in any jurisdiction to be able to make this effective. In the UK, there are the beginnings of those forms of collaboration between regulators, and I suppose it's a jurisdictional kind of matter as to the extent.
Abigail, you're not a politician, my dear. You can say that question. You can answer directly. Should government do it? Or unless you're funded by the UK government, of course. But, it's a simple question. Should government have the responsibility? Given it, government is funded by taxpayer. AI is probably the biggest challenge to society as we know it now. So my question is, should it be government doing it, or should we leave it as a flowering, thousand flowers bloom approach?
I think it's possible so we aren't funded by the government, although we would welcome government funding, of course. We are the Institute for the Future of Work and myself believes that there is a need for more stringent intervention, regulation, legislation in the UK context. These kinds of architectures for learning about what's best need to be resourced. I think that is a public good, and there's an interest in state institutions doing it. I don't think that that there is no role for civil society. I think that civil society, unions, social partnership models should be important in that, and that an exclusive focus on the state could overlook those wider architectures to feed into this kind of debate.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry to push you, it's just that those of you who've not seen this report that we launched in February this year, the 10 policy choices for a renewed social contract. And in that, we're really clear that we need to kind of rethink roles and responsibilities into the future. And the model that we've had up to now, whilst it may have served us to a certain extent, has probably unraveled in the past 30 to 40 years. And in that, we kind of set out a set of policy choices that are, I suppose, things like tax for a good society, enable the private sector to be a shareholder in a better society. So we are saying that we need a more interventionist collaborative approach, but someone has to lead it. And given the crises that we're going to experience in the coming years, probably a new COVID thing that's happening right now, when people are kind of in workplaces going off, let alone the energy crisis, etc. You can't leave it simply to somebody else and look around and say, oh, who's going to take charge? And so what we're saying is that given that most of what happened during COVID was funded by the taxpayer, and given the fact that we are entering a world that we don't quite understand, and it's not predictable, and we can't use the past or a rear view mirror to understand how we might respond to what might happen, which is multiple, serial and parallel in our experiences. So that's why I was pushing you. I think we all need to be a bit bolder about the role that government can play, but also the private sector. I want to open it up to you. Thank you very much, Abigail, and thank you for being a partner with us on this debate too. So what do you think about this debate? What are you concerned about? What questions are raised for you? Now I can see a lot of people are going to look down, because they can see that if I look you in the eye, I'm going to pick on you. But come on. Gentleman there in the white shirt, you caught my eye. So you don't have to say anything. That's you there. That's you. Yeah, absolutely. There's a mic on its way to you. And even if I pick on you, you
Thanks.
don't have to. You could say, no, sod off, I'm not going to talk.
Actually, I have a lot of questions, so it's
good.
fine. So thanks a lot. I was very happy to hear about ontologies from the start.
Say who you are, would you please?
My name. So, Simon Hardy, you can tell by the romantic French accent. Kidding aside, I was very happy to hear about ontologies because we are missing this point in the EU. It's something that, for instance, Palantir is focusing on with Palantir Foundry, and this is an example that we need to follow. In the EU, because I have my own startup, yeah, and it's about a social contract, so I will definitely get in touch with you at the end of this event. The issue is to get funding, actually, because I'm already thinking about leaving EU and to go in the US, so already I'm in touch with people in Riyadh, actually, because when I speak to someone at the regional level, he doesn't get it. He's very honest about it. When I speak to someone at the EU level, they will say, you have to go through the EIC accelerator. So it's 6 months, 1 year. And they don't understand the term of velocity. So it's already an issue. And then we don't even have cloud. Gaia X, Gaia 10 was, and is, I will be very blunt, a total failure. So we are dependent on external players. But it's already a lot of questions. I would really like to have your view on public funding and how to improve that. Because at the moment, yeah, it's...
So, if, in a nutshell, I mean, are you a worried man about the developments of AR, or are you still optimistic? Do you think we've just lost it?
In the EU, to be honest, if we... Yeah, somehow we lost it at the moment, and we're losing it, because the regulation is not helping that much. If you think about the GDPR, the GDPR is very nice. Okay, the idea is very nice. But what about the implementation? The implementation should have been designed about, okay, let's put a repository of all the data brokers. Let's link that to the European digital wallet and give the possibility of all the citizens to send automatic emails with the regulation asking them, I want you as a data broker to withdraw my data. And then all the external players cannot use your data to train their models. End of the story.
Absolutely. I mean, you get the... I mean, when you think about the Draghi report and what he says... No, oh, sorry, I won't pester you any further. But when you think about the Draghi report and what he says, ultimately, it's not about more money. He talks about having much more money. You know, from our perspective, it's about using the money more wisely. And there's so much in the system they could make easily accessible, but think differently. They look at you. We hear this in this forum so many times. Entrepreneurs saying, I'll get a venture capitalist in the United States that will boost me within months. I have to wait a year here. I can't access the funding because it's really administratively burdensome. And I think that at some point we need to create passporting facilities. What I mean by that is that if you meet a minimum standard, then you should be supported and escalated through. And I'm not sure if there's anyone from the Commission here, but it'll be great to hear from you if that's good. But thank you very much.
Can I say something more?
Yes.
Because you were talking about EU-funded project. So just to give you a concrete example, it took me 1 year. I sent many reminders to get in touch with the EU-funded project. After 1 year, I put the Ombudsman of the EU and I sent a request to the Commission asking them to finally get back to me. 1 million euro. They spent 1 million euro. They have just a data set with no open data standard. The data is from 2 years ago, and now they're asking for more funding just to put that in open data standard and to put an API. And they almost asked me during the call to work for them freely. And I was just like, that. Okay.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'll come to you in a second. I've got Jonathan here. Just lady here. Again, please say who you are.
Sure. Sevinç Kader from European AI Hub, a newly created
That's
platform
right.
in
Glad
Brussels.
you're here.
Yes, thank you very much for organizing such an interesting debate. My expertise area is more on AI and democracy, but I believe human capital and especially education policy is part of democratic debate and maybe the most essential part of it. We discussed about, reskilling and upskilling. I think this is one of the most important crises of democracy because many jobs will be eliminated under the wave of this new AI revolution. So are the governments really ready for it? I don't think so. When we see our governments and democratic institutions, how they function, how they operate, how they make decisions, these are very much 20th century organizations, and the way of working is very much outdated. So how we can really expect from those organizations and the way of working, the mentality, to generate something for 21st century and address the needs of 21st century citizens? How we are really going to, provide these opportunities to our citizens for new sets of skills, whether it's an upskilling or reskilling for the new economy. When I look at the new commission and the mission statements, I don't see that there concretely. There are too many overlapping portfolios. Who is in charge of what? I don't see that. And plus, of course, education is not an EU competence. So I would love to hear your panelists, what they would say.
Okay, I'll bring them in a minute. What's your view in, should there be an AI vice president?
In the Commission? Oh, definitely, there must be one. If we have, we have EU AI Act, but this is amazing. Europe is the leader in regulation in this domain. Of course, different actors have different approaches. United States has a different approach. Yeah. China has a completely different approach. But at the same time, do we really integrate it in horizontally, in all our domains we have? We have AI office, just newly created, but I believe we need more investment in that and a better, focus on this in the new European Commission.
Thank you. So that I can shake you up a little bit, just hands up if you can be bold enough to say, do you think there ought to be a vice president that's in charge of AI at the Commission? Hands up if you think so. Are the rest of you just shy or unsure? There can't be just 3 or 4 of you.
As long as she or he's capable.
Okay, I get you. All right, I can see what's probably going through your heads. That they could get someone who hasn't got a clue. Okay, fine. Thank you very much, and we'll discuss some of that. Gentleman there.
Hi, I'm Kostas Dervenis. I'm an advisor on IT and cybersecurity for various companies. I think you started the conversation saying something that we're all dancing around now, that we're talking about a battle between innovation and regulation. But the innovation is not European-owned. It's American-owned and Chinese-owned, okay? And we're talking about trying to regulate something that we have no direct access to. It will fail. Regulation, okay, primitive man hunted large animals. He didn't hunt them by going straight at them. If we try to regulate AI now, it's like we're trying to hunt a mammoth with arrows and rocks. First, we have to dig a hole. If the mammoth falls into the hole, then we can kill it and bring it home to our camp for our children to eat. But regulation against AI that we do not own and we do not innovate, ultimately, it's doomed to fail. We need to find another approach. We need to dig a hole for the mammoth to fall in.
What does that mean? Explain that, your erudite thinking, as always. What would you mean to these, people here in this room? What would you want government, what do you want the Commission to do?
We need to go 90 degrees, okay? Appointing an AI commissioner, appointing an IT commissioner has worked in some countries, it hasn't worked in others.
That's true.
Okay? You have to have somebody that has a technological base. And even if he does, he doesn't control the item itself, the artifact itself. It's being developed elsewhere. The engineers are owned by somebody else, okay? The capabilities that are absorbed by the system are regulated, quote unquote, by other countries.
So specifically, what would you want Ursula von der Leyen to do on this agenda?
I don't know yet, but
okay.
I'll inform you.
Okay, perhaps we do need to crowdsource this a little bit, because not everyone has the answer to the question. Perhaps we need to adopt that model of saying the brain is outside and inside, not just amongst certain people. Thank you for that. I'm now going to turn to our last two speakers, and I'm very pleased that we have OECD here. Lisa, thank you for being here. You have a very significant overview and outlook, because you work with the countries across larger than the EU. And you've been doing a lot of work on this agenda. From your perspective, right, what should we be thinking about? What are the needs of the future workforce that we should be thinking about? Or what do you see as the challenges for a future workforce in the context of AI, as a starter?
So the way we see it is not just AI, it's also the other transitions we're going through. So AI, the digital transition at large, but also the green transition and also the aging population. So we see those changes going actually beyond just the AI issue. The way we approach it is we have a holistic view when it comes to skills. For a couple of reasons. One is there is a shelf life in terms of skills. We see it particularly when it comes to AI. And so if you look at work we've done, but also recently the World Economic Forum report of 2023 indicated that about 44%, I think, of worker skills will be disrupted in the next 5 years. So we find ourselves in a situation where the skills that people hold will be changing in any case. And so the way we see adaptation in those is really to have the foundational skills, but it goes beyond that. It goes also, it's not just about having the technical skills, which in and of themselves change. For instance, if you think about the whole trend that there was that everyone should be learning coding and that was the future, you can see now that that is less of a really outstanding career path necessarily, right? Study path at least. So the way we see it is that you need the technical skills, but you need the professional technical skills, but also the kind of transversal skills that will allow workers to adapt. So it's really about complex problem solving, about critical thinking, communication, teamwork, all of these skills that allow us to look into people adapting and being more resilient within this very changing type of environment. So that's how we see it. And it's really not that easy in that sense, because in a way it builds also on foundational skills. So we're not saying you can do it without, just learning by doing. Also, what we see is that clearly sort of reading, numeracy, digital skills, those foundational skills need to be strengthened in any case. So that's how we see it.
So, absolutely. But what do we do in terms of when you think about the OECD countries that you're working with? Do you see anywhere that you think, yeah, they've got a grip, and actually this is perhaps, because on this agenda, as I said to the gentleman, that no one's got the answer. You need to be able to really think about, looking at it through a crowdsourcing model of ideas and recommendations. Do you see a country that you think, they're taking the right approach for both future skills proofing, but also the regulation, privacy, social dimension?
Yeah, no, there's no naming and shaming here about anyone doing it well. I think everyone is trying, which is already in and of itself good. It's not just about countries.
I'm not naming and shaming. I'm waiting today.
Yeah.
It's not about that. It's just, we want to know, is Singapore the place that's doing the do? Or is it, is it somewhere in, a small little country in Africa or India? Or, where?
It would be easy if that would be the case. But even in Singapore, for instance, very good on technical skills. But when it comes to socio-emotional skills, they also have quite a lot in terms of development. So
Indeed.
It's not really, it's going back to that holistic. So there's not really one that we can put out there. But it's not just about the countries, it's also the sectors. So these transversal skills, we did a study looking at the AI industry itself, and we looked at online vacancies for AI jobs. And very interestingly in that one, you had, of course, all of the technical skills that are people that the employers are looking for. But the skills that appeared the most were transversal skills. So they were looking for communication, teamwork, problem solving, adaptability. So you can see that even in that very technical niche, they are looking at people mastering and holding those other types of skills. So I think, and the more we talk about the human-machine interaction, the more these social-emotional skills also come into play. So I can't tell you country A is doing it, because that would be the blueprint for all of the others. But what we can see is that it is at the forefront of the agenda of most of the countries. And that in and of itself is already really very promising.
And in terms of when you think about the, so if a 16-year-old now has grown up on this, basically, hardwired, 16-year-old, hardwired on this, thinking very differently, social skills are probably inept, unless their parents have really intervened, but they're very social here. And I'm thinking that what kind of world of work will they enter? What will they need? And so this is me perhaps answering your question, is that's going to have to be those softer skills, because all they know is about interacting mostly through this platform.
Well, two things on this. One is, first of all, the world of work may end up very much on that, right? So we have to also see that. We've seen already a change when it came to COVID. We've seen a lot of changes in terms of social interactions of young people, particularly young men, very interestingly as well, who were less able to read the room because they've learned to see the room across the screen. So there's certainly something there. I think so that's one thing, but I think we also need to take a step back and just perhaps, think that the world we have been working on, in at least the panelists, perhaps less the audience, which is much younger, is quite different. I think is going to be different. So they will have to adapt. But that does not mean that those skills will disappear. It's just there's a different type of interactions. But I think you're right. It's something we need to look at closely, because we're seeing already some elements that are slightly raising, perhaps not concern, but at least strong interest about what that means in terms of interactions, what that means as well for the managers to manage people who are less there, who communicate differently, when you haven't really learned to read the body language of people because you've been mostly going through video calls. That's also a different type of, how do you read the person? How do you get the nuance, the subtlety of the interaction as well, that you may have had if you're sitting in the same room. So I think we need to adapt as well the communication styles we have, including when a lot of the communication will be generated by ChatGPT.
Exactly. I'm glad you went there, Because from our perspective, we've embraced AI in an open arms way. We don't want to be scared of it, but we want to be responsible about it. But what's absolutely clear is that you could end up with a future work model which is lean, completely lean, with a very few number of people, but the AI models could do the writing, the editing, the filming, everything you can think of, and all you need is about 4 or 5 people that could run the show and become a digital think tank using AI. And I think that, to myself, from your perspective, if we think about skills and workforce, the supply side of that is education. Education. Is our education currently geared up for the AI revolution? Have you been doing work on that at the OECD?
You like straight answers, so the answer is no. Not yet. Not yet. I think a lot of countries are doing better. Digital education is being included. You have, particularly in Asia, and there are some clear examples there where teachers are using it and adapting as well their teaching. The virtual tutoring is being inserted, and that is starting to work. It's still really going very slowly, much less in Europe. It has implications as well. I think, there was the conversation before about regulation. There's an issue between the pace of the development and how we adapt to it, because in some of these countries where that has been implemented, there are privacy issues about students being looked at through a camera the whole time, from the moment they enter the building until the end, and the way they interact and the way they're looking and concentrating or not. Of course, it may help the professor or the teacher because they see, this is where the person has sort of logged off in terms of focus. This is where they need some help. This is where I need to come in as a teacher. But at the same time, you have strong privacy issues when it comes to that, and autonomy as well, perhaps. So I think there's concerns. So I would really perhaps caution us all to not just see the pace of just investment and going forward and not think about the implication this has on privacy, this has on autonomy, this has also on just human interactions.
Absolutely, but the quality of education. I think that's where I mean, we personally believe Draghi did not pay attention to the supply side of, the competitive thing, which is about people and skills. And, little fun fact, over 60% of the teaching population in Europe is over 50. And we can't retain young people coming into it. A lot of men won't come into the teaching profession, and mostly women, and they won't stay because there's just no sense of stability, predictability, and good salary. So the most important thing in our societies, which is education, is the most poorly invested in and poorly nurtured. And it's not in the Draghi report or in the letter report. They talked about the big stuff, but it's almost like myopic that in order to feed the system, you're going to have better Look what China's doing. Look what India's doing. Gosh, there's about, I think 1,000 software engineers produced a year in India. Go figure. Education is like the top of the, and for a country that's become, is going to have the largest middle class in the world in the next 3 years. So, there are lessons. Can we just, before we move on to Hugo, and you've been so patient, thank you for being patient with me. Mental health. Say a little bit about what you think the implications are, and you've touched upon it a little bit in terms of social interaction, but have you been looking at this? What are your concerns to share? Because we've not looked at that element, that end of what's happening here.
Yeah, I think that's one area where we need to look into a little bit more closely, and not just the OECD, but also other partners, in that this point you were making at the beginning of the fear, people are rational. I think, there's fear, of course, of disruption, job disruption, that in and of itself creates an upstream fear. Is my job going to not only disappear, but perhaps change? How is it going to change? Does my manager even know how it is going to change? Does the sector even give me some indication of how it's going to change? Does, supranational institutions? So I think that's very clearly there. And the fear has translated into also perhaps a lagging adaptation in some cases. So that's important. I think we need to have some answers around that. There's been very little research around this. There's been some research that we've done at the OECD on the employment outlook as well, and we've seen positive and negative trends. So the positive trends are people who have been engaging in AI have actually literally said that they enjoy more their job, because a lot of the routine and perhaps even sort of some of the more problematic tasks are being done by someone else. So that's great. At the same time, we've seen that this creates a little bit of anxiety in some countries. There's been some research in Japan in particular, looking at 10,000 workers, where they've seen that the fact that people are now doing less of these routine tasks means they're doing more complex tasks. And so that ambiguity creates anxiety. And a lot of the workers in the survey mentioned that creates for them, because if you stop doing the very routine type of work where you don't have to think much and easy to do, and you're only asked to focus on complex tasks or on quality assurance of what an AI produce has come out of, then that creates this anxiety. And there's very little that is coming out on this. This is something I think we need to look at more closely. So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, this work intensification, of course, that it creates. We've seen the job disruption. We don't really have good answers about it, right? So we have, your job will a little bit change, but it's about tasks, it's about not the whole occupation. Some will, but you could be reskilling through this and that. But we don't really have good answers about this, and we don't have really good projections. So I think that creates this as well. The other point is the one I was mentioning about social interaction. So a lot of what we've seen is that some of the young people who are very much interacting with, let's say, ChatGPT, just for an example, are being used to a very specific type of tone, right? ChatGPT, if you've interacted with it, is extremely cordial, extremely polite, and will answer you again and again and adapt to your question as you re-ask and so on. That is not necessarily the workplace dynamic. Right? So the more you have young people going through this, adapted to a type of very almost submissive type of interaction, and being used to that, and then finding themselves in a workplace where constructing feedback might be approached and assessed differently. Right? How do you handle that if you have mostly grown up having, that kind of patience, and then you end up being in a workplace that is different? You could say, well, the workplace has to change. That's great. The fact of the matter is it does take some time. So that's one thing that I think we need to look at a little bit more closely in terms of what that may mean as well for them entering the workplace.
Indeed,
right?
I can see a lot of people nodding as your last points. But it goes back to that point about how do you sort the education side of this? Because these kids are going to school, and you have to rethink education, the model of education to do that, which I know is rather bold. But at some point we need to be able to get to the grips with it, because there's a whole generation that are growing up on this, and I don't think we have a Scooby what it's going to be like interacting socially, emotionally with them. And we can see that not just in the UK but across Europe, the growth and the increase of poor mental health amongst 9 to 14-year-olds is like that. And self-harm, all the rest of it. It's just, and it could be on epidemic levels because not all countries are monitoring it in the same way. That's the problem. But thank you for your contribution. I'm going to go to Hugues. Hugues, you've been here so patient, and you have this wonderful title. He's head of intelligence at the European Training Foundation. Lovely to have you here, and thank you for being so patient. You've been doing a lot of work in thinking about how different countries are closing the gap. And capability, resources, etc., and so forth. What measures, from your perspective, can be taken to ensure that AI-driven opportunities, especially in underdeveloped regions, can be taken account of? So how do you ensure that we don't get this unequal, this inequity of opportunity, both in regions but countries, and what needs to happen? So just share your thoughts a little bit on that point first.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I hope you can hear me well. First of all, let me maybe go back a little bit and explain what we are doing at ETF. I think it's important a little bit.
Please.
ETF is an agency of the European Union, so we are fully part of the EU and EC community, and our mission is to work with neighboring countries of the European Union, from Morocco to Jordan, then Western Balkan candidate countries, Ukraine, of course, up to Central Asia, to Tajikistan, so really frontier with China. So what we call the neighborhood, European neighborhood, and to support these countries in developing their human capital. So let's say that everything that relates to education, training, in a lifelong learning perspective is what we exchange on and what we develop knowledge on, and how we work with these countries for policy advice. Second point maybe I think is important is I think when we talk about AI issues and what kind of solutions there are, to bring the workforce and students into this market, labor market, but also training institutions that will be impacted by AI, is that there are for sure specific issues related to AI, but I think also that AI should not necessarily be too isolated and considered as a standalone subject or technology. It's part, and I think you said that, Elisa, of maybe a broader and long-term digital, numerical, IT, whatever you want to call it, evolution or revolution that we've been going through for the past 50 years, if not more. The term, of course, artificial intelligence, that's back in the 1950s. So we have, I think, to make a balance between what is key to address in specific issues with AI and what should be maybe taken into consideration with other elements. So what do we do now? What we do, before I go on how we can support countries, is we do a lot of monitoring and assessment. Actually, the name of that unit is Intelligence Unit. We gather information, and it used to be monitoring and assessment, which was probably a little bit more modest in a way. But we gather a lot of information on the countries we work with in terms of education outcomes, training processes, and training institutions, and the needs of labor markets. So we do studies like skills mismatch diagnosis, and of course the AI goes into the full picture of what are the mismatch between the skills development and what I call the skill production from the education system and the skill needs in the labor market. We also work a lot and happy to meet colleagues from the Institute of Future of Work in the UK on future of skills and future of work. So here we work on specific sectors in specific countries to try to see what will be the evolution of skills needs. And we actually work with AI tools, and as you do, Elisa, and OECD, we work on online job vacancies, we work also on patents and what patents are being recognized and granted. We work on a number of, for example, of scientific literature also to try to, if not predict all, of course, but to try to foresee a bit what is coming on the market in terms of skills, and AI is growingly, of course, part of it. Though you have to consider our geography. It's not the same in Morocco, it's in Albania, in Kyrgyzstan, of course. There is a very various set of geographies here. The second thing that I would like to say, so AI is one element, I think, of broader approaches that we need to have on education training and also how we consider the needs of skills in the labor market. Second thing, of course, because we are an EU institution, we are fully part also of the EU dynamics and EU logic of how it considers AI for the good and maybe for the worse. I heard what you said about, why are we the primary regulators of AI, whereas 70% of what is being done and the engineers and the firms are not here. Still, we are part of that, and we also work on that, and we develop and communicate this specific approach of AI, as has been said in the AI Act, in the partner countries that we work with, AI to be trustworthy and human-centric. So we have also to find this balance between AI developments, what it steers on labor market, how it's going to open competitiveness, but also the fact that AI is, in our perspective, in the philosophy in which we belong, needs to be regulated and to have this kind of cautious, to say the least, approach. Now, I come to your point. We work on policy advice, so we don't have big programs that we fund. We work directly on policy advice with our partner countries, but also with
Do they come to you or do you go to them? Sorry to interrupt you. Do they come to you or do you go to them, or do they have to go to you because of some funding from the EU?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. So they come to us because we've been existing now for 30 years and we have very good relationship with them. And also Brussels come to us and asks requests to work on a diagnosis or a set of policies that we should develop with these countries. So it's really a little bit of both. And we also partner with other institutions in some cases to work with them. So we have done that in the past, and hopefully we'll do it again with the World Bank. We work with OECD, with UNESCO and others.
And tell us what you actually do. So, the reason why I'm asking is because I'm going to ask you the same question I did Elisa, is that you've got this vast variable geography of capabilities, aptitudes, material circumstances, economics, right? When you look around that geography, is there something that you say that there's something which is the same across all, or where you can see standout stuff? Because I'll tell you where I'm going with this. You have Albania and the Western Balkans. You have a hive of technological activity taking place, mostly led by the private sector. The woman that creates ChatGPT leapfrog Europe and goes straight into the US. How is that? Where you've got that capability and that understanding, yet you've got people like that all over Europe that are just not being harnessed. And what role can the ETF play in spotting talent or supporting governments to spot talent and nurture it?
So yeah, definitely I wouldn't say that there is an average between all of these countries in what they do.
Sure.
There's more a dispersion of situations and also a rapid evolution of the situation, not only because we're talking about AI, but also because some circumstances, I'm thinking about, what happened in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, and how the war in Ukraine we see has repositioned Ukraine not only on the geopolitical scene, but also, I would guess, on the technological scene, for
Indeed.
example. So it really evolves very, very quickly. Here again, another thing is that, of course, we are European Union, so we work with the European neighborhood, and we have this tendency to see what are the needs of skills for Europe and in those countries. But of course, people in these countries look at the world, the whole world. So, if Morocco has need to train the workforce on AI, they are not going to come and ask the European Union only. It might be the case, and we have developed infrastructure investments in Morocco, especially for served rural areas, so that they can have access to digital tools, but also to AI training. But of course, they will also go elsewhere. So there is a very interesting geographical and geopolitical dynamics between the European neighborhood and Europe and the rest of the world when it comes to the practices, when it comes to exchanges, and of course to training possibilities. So I gave you an example of what we can do.
Yeah.
We can design infrastructure programs, especially in terms of, trying to reintegrate the digital needs and skills that need to be developed, and AI within that, within the broader picture of equity that you referred to at the very beginning. Because it's important to work both, as a laser. So what are the skills needed for Europe to become competitive and to become a player if it's not lost on AI and with AI, but also to embrace a large workforce and try to not let people lag behind in terms of their capacity. So we also work a lot with this kind of equity program. For example, we tend to work with our country in designing from the beginning policies that are inclusive. So if we integrate, we did that, for example, with Egypt, AI literacy into broader vocational training spaces and curricula. We also, from the beginning, ensure that women, but also different vulnerable groups will be integrated in these programs so that AI embraces a large share of students. And there are also digital skills initiatives. We have one with Serbia, which is called Digital Skills for the Future, where we, at the same time, try to see what are the investment that are needed in working both in learning AI and in learning with AI in a country, but also at the same time embracing the equity issue in this country.
Thank you. One of the things I'm thinking about, I'm glad you raised the issue of gender. I've got two questions for you. One is, how's your future business model being determined by AI? Because you are as you say, the European Training Foundation. So how's AI affecting your business model? And that really important point, which hasn't been raised at all today, is that ultimately the winners and losers of AI are the people that are going to be those who can use the algorithms and the data sharply. We know women are totally underrepresented in that field of being skilled up, being enabled and being empowered to be the programmers and the algorithm creators of the future. Are you doing anything about that?
Yeah, so definitely we also have gender-sensitive programs that we work with country. And here again, it's very different based on the regions. In some regions, not for AI specifically, but especially on the northern part of the region that we work with, the European neighborhood, actually boys have been lagging behind for some time, especially in secondary and tertiary education. South of the Mediterranean, there's a gender gap for girls to access the labor market. They are better performing at school and they are better in terms of learning outcomes, but they have less access to possibilities on the labor market. So all of these issues which includes, of course, AI. That's why I said that AI does not necessarily need or ought to be thought as a standalone element. We really work with our countries and think of these in particular gender elements. I don't remember the first part of your question, though. Sorry.
It's about
how it impacted us.
Yes.
Yeah. So, of course, a lot of things that we do is to try to foresee as much as we can, and with all the methodological caveats that we can have, what will be the evolution of needs, of skills, and skills needs in those countries. AI came into the picture some time ago because there have been already reports from McKinsey and others for 10 and 15 years, but even more after COVID and after GPT, of course, it has accelerated. So we have integrated this aspect into what we do, and Elisa said just that with what OECD is doing. Now, of course, how it has impacted us is that we also now have AI possibility that we integrate in our work. We are developing, for example, an AI platform which allows us to upscale very much the methodology that we use on big data for patents, for literature, scientific literatures, and what we see coming in terms of skills needs, and also online job vacancies, so that AI works with us or for us in order to have more of information and more timely information on this topic. One of the things also is that, you remember that when the first reports on impact of AI on the workforce came up, one of the things is that intellectual professions were also at risk. We all know that. So now there is a distinction between whether they will be augmented or complemented, or whether they will be replaced or substituted. And, it's not exactly quite clear. But one of the things, for example, we discussed in-house is, okay, there are a number of reports that we do, especially when I'm leading also on the quantitative data team, which might be in a close future done by artificial intelligence.
Absolutely.
So what do we do here? How does it augment, complement, or substitute what we're going to do? Actually, I tried to prepare a few things here for this meeting with, not remember which one, I'm not going to do publicity here. It didn't give very good results. And it's beyond that. The results were, okay, if I say that, everybody will have a look at it and will say the same things. So we also have to see here the delineation between what is going to augment us and where we're going to become irrelevant in the work that we do as knowledge producers, much less probably as policy advisors, if I would say so.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just as much as AI is determined by the data and how it's constructed and used in an AI model, it's as much about the questions you ask. You know that if you're going to ask a clumsy question, you're going to get a clumsy response. And I'm not saying that you asked a clumsy question, I'm just saying there's something about the fact that you really have to think hard about the question you're asking the machine. And I think that that's something that we are all going to have. But the point you make, that in the past 10 years, people thought it was going to be service industry. I think it's really important we understand this. And I think it helps us think ahead, because now doctors, health practitioners, lawyers, research institutes, academic research institutes could do peer review like that, and they will go back and do it. All you need is a couple of people to look at it. We know that robotic-assisted surgery has far greater accuracy than human surgery. We know it. It's just because of the forensic nature of the eye and the precision of the tool, and that's the reality of what's happening. So it's a kind of affecting all of us rather than just the poor service classes, something that we all need to think about. Thank you very much for joining us. We have less than 10 minutes, colleagues, or 10 minutes. Arise, speak. What do you want to say? What's made you concerned? What concerns you? What questions do you have in your head? Have we touched the debate properly? Have we invested? Have we got to the heart of stuff that you think should be discussed? Okay, I've had you two before. Great. I'll take you first, lady here with the glasses, and then the gentleman here with the glasses.
Hi.
And this lovely group of young people here, which I'm being absolutely not pejorative, but you are a group of young people. Give us your views on what you think, or are you just incredibly youthful looking? That's all. Go on, go, yeah.
Not sure if you're talking about me, but...
Please say who you are.
Yes, my name is Laura Nursky. I work for the Center of European Policy Studies, CEPS. I have a question for Abigail, actually, if she can hear me. Abigail, I was thinking of your introduction remarks about how the debate between automation and augmentation doesn't really capture the erosion of autonomy or the potential de-skilling effects of AI. And I think you and I will both agree that it's not necessarily a deterministic consequence of the technology, but that it's mediated by how it's implemented in workplaces, how it changes management processes, operational processes, human resources processes, etc. So that all happens inside organizations. So when the moderator was pushing you on the intervention of the state and you came back with scope for social dialogue or civil society, I was still left wondering how does that intervention can really end up inside organizations, how we can intervene in those management processes that are really the prerogative of the firm in order to protect the design of jobs and autonomy of the worker.
But in that context, therefore, do you think government should be taking the lead in this?
I think there are some things that government can do. I mean, in terms of soft policy or setting standards, of course, through regulation, but also in filling informational gaps. I do think there's a big gap in information about the link between those organizational processes, the way technology is implemented, and then the resulting design of jobs for individual workers.
So let me be clear. I mean, our advantage, if when you do read this, which I hope you get a chance to read it, we're not saying that the state should take control and be, totally in charge of it. We're saying that the state has a responsibility for the public good. AI has the potential to destroy the public good, and therefore if you know that, government should step in, provide, let's say, the soft capital, the incentive capital, but to be a curator, to be the craftsperson, bringing colleagues together from different sectors and say, let's sandbox this idea. That's what we're talking about, and that's why I'm saying I don't understand why people are feeling concerned that government shouldn't do it. That's what the role that we're describing, that if you are the purveyor and the protector of social good, then somehow you have that responsibility has to extend beyond it. But thank you for your question. Gentleman here with the glasses, I forgot. Yeah. Any of you at the back? Don't want to leave you behind. You've had one shot. But also, I want to say hello to all the people online. I'm sorry not be able to bring you in because it's not been interactive, but if you've got any comments or anything, you've got the hashtag AI Society Forum or hashtag FOE Debate. So don't hesitate to put your comments in too.
Thank you very much. David Timmis. I represent Generation, which is one of the largest employment nonprofits in the world.
That's right.
But I don't have a question on behalf of Generation because I would probably need another 2 hours for that, since the main topic is AI and human capital, and we work a lot on reskilling and placing people into jobs. I'm going to ask a question on an individual basis because I'm also an AI and future of work expert working with companies trying to deploy AI. And funny enough, often when I consult these large multinationals about their own AI deployments and how their workers feel, the discussion moves around the topic that you've touched upon, and I'm glad you did, which is education. But education at a much earlier level, primary school. And the worry I hear from many of the parents in the room, maybe we have some parents here as well, is that their children are using a lot, of course, in ChatGPT, Gemini, and other tools to do their homework. And the worry I see in their eyes, that maybe sometimes they don't have the words to explain, is actually writing is a way to develop critical thinking.
Absolutely.
That's the connection between these two sessions, I would say. Critical thinking is a key skill. AI is more and more impacting democracy also in nefarious ways with deepfakes. So if you have now a generation that grows up, as you rightfully mentioned, with a phone with ChatGPT on, and they delegate, for obvious reasons, because they're children, the writing of homework and essays to a ChatGPT, what will that do to their critical thinking? And when they become adults, to their capability to discern fact from fiction. So it's not necessarily a question, because I don't know if anybody has the answer, but I'm curious to hear your opinion. It's just more of a concern I have as a hopefully future father, because I'm not sure how parents can control and how teachers can control whether their children use or not ChatGPT. And if you're a child, I mean, it's not hard to imagine the choice of a homework done in 5 minutes with ChatGPT or, spending hours. It's a clear choice.
Absolutely, it's a really good question. So what we're alluding to, that in a sense that the future generations, let's say the people that are 15 or 12 now, or even 10, will be very different to us in this room. And it's going to be, woof, let's see. I mean, let's hope, human nature is always, I err on the side of the fact that, we always have good human nature, but we have to be able to manage it and support it and nurture it rather than just stand aside. But you're absolutely right. And it's interesting that I think there's a school in the UK, Abigail, you might know, that there's an academy that's now banning phones in secondary schools. Like 30,000 children won't be able to have a mobile phone in school. A bit too late, I think, when you get to secondary school, but hey, it's a symbolic move. Abigail, can we go to all the panel in the last 5 minutes first and ask you your reflection on the question, but also your thoughts on what we've been discussing?
Thank you. Well, I'd love to get into a technical debate with Laura at a later time about whether or not we can, under any models, predict the future, given the ways that firms make choices and that this is ultimately politically constructed. But I suppose to reflect on some of the rest of the conversation, and also your first call for us to be thinking about the new social contract, I just wanted to highlight, in relation to skills and well-being, I think there were some really important points raised by Elisa around, demand control imbalance with intensification, and the kind of dignity impacts of what we might describe as low discretion, augmentation, or routinization. But in the Pissarides review, we've also used the capabilities approach, which looks at a kind of novel measure of well-being, which is related to these foundational freedoms that we feel as people, and how this is related to experience of technology. So these kinds of capabilities are listed in survey items as things such as, I am able to feel safe and secure, I am able to feel strong relationships, I'm able to feel connected to the people around me. And what we found is that people that have more of those foundational capabilities have higher resilience to technological shocks. But equally, those who have different types of job quality are more likely to have those foundational freedoms and capabilities. So I think that takes us to this conversation about the social contract in another angle as well, which is to say that actually the broader architectures, if we think about having adaptable, dynamic people that are able to move between different professions and careers throughout their lives, but actually some of the ingredients that support resilience are more than a purely human capital approach of, well, we need to pour in this knowledge now and pour in that skill now. Actually, the kind of conditions for resilience go to a broader set of capabilities, which I think very much are part of the domain of the state and its responsibilities. And then a further point just on skills and the question of geography. We've recently done work which found that employers who are in labour markets with a lower local level of educational attainment are more likely to adopt and deploy in ways which reduce the demand for total number of roles and reduce the demand for skills and reduce job quality. So there's a dynamic interaction even within a single country context between choices about deployment and these kinds of outcomes in practice, which again is another justification for inviting the public sector, devolution in our context, but also regional approaches in wider places into these questions about AI governance as they are dynamically related.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you for excellent concluding remarks, which I'm not trying to be invidious that setting you up, but I want each of you to be able to reflect on the debate. So, thank you very much.
So thanks to my co-panelists, hugely informative debate and a lot of expertise around the table. I learned a lot. I want to come back to something you said at the beginning about the sort of what is the responsibility of the private sector, what's the responsibility of policymakers. I think as companies innovating in this space, we have a responsibility to go about the innovation based on ethical principles and in a responsible way. I think policymakers have stepped up to the challenge of making sure that AI works for good across society in a way that's pretty impressive. We know about the EU AI Act that has been adopted and this is now in operation. That has been underway for some time, as you probably know, and that has been steering behavior by companies because the direction of travel has been clear. So companies have been looking at what are the emerging requirements that we need to meet. I think we're pretty confident that the regulation will be successful in setting a floor in terms of making sure that the AI applications that are deployed at scale in companies and elsewhere are trustworthy and are of high quality, etc. Policymakers also have responsibilities in terms of making sure that we have the skills, that people have the skills necessary, that education systems evolve to take this revolution into account and make sure that children and young people are well equipped for the world of work that awaits them. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
No, thank you. Before you hand over, I'm going to kind of mix it up a bit, because Hugo, you've been waiting so patiently. I want to give you the chance now for any remarks you want to make that you may not have made already, given where we find ourselves at this concluding part of the debate. Perhaps reflect on what you think the EU should focus on.
I'm not sure exactly what the EU should focus on, so if you don't mind, I just want to
do your own thing.
A little comment, but
yeah.
It might be some part of the response. You know, we are trying to think, and especially with AI, but it was the case before with every technical or technological revolution, where is it going to lead us, as if the story was written somewhere, and we are trying to foresee or discover what would be the impact and so on, which is true, because in a way something has been launched and will go up to its possibilities. Now, of course, the thing is that it's a two-way street. How does the situation of our training system, education system, workforce, and also labor market have an impact on how AI will develop? So, and this is true at different levels. This is true in the competitive level between countries. So the US, China, other Asian countries, and some countries maybe like Israel or other countries in Europe will be more advanced and others will lag behind. But also in general, there's a sense of the global scene. So what I'm just trying to say is that it's difficult to know exactly what to do, because what we don't think is that what we have now already has an impact, and what we decide on how it's going to unfold, and we really don't know how it's going to unfold.
That's slightly depressing, Hugo, but the point is that political leaders and senior civil servants have a responsibility to find out. They have to have the accountability, and in order to do that, to have the trust of citizens that are, paying taxes for their social good. So I think that while I take your point, but we need to be thinking about a different kind of collaborative accountability for creating good in this. But let's move on. But thank you very much for that. Veronique, over to you. In terms of, do you want to address the kind of issue around schooling, education? And if not, whatever remark you'd like to make in conclusion to the debate.
Yes, I would like to make the remark to the parents here. I'm a parent too, even if they are elder. And I noticed, well, we all notice in different countries across Europe that we are limiting the use of phones in class and so on. And now there's a companion, and Copilot or ChatGPT is designed as a companion. And I think if there is one danger, I think you can't take AI away. I would be very interested to know how this hole to dig would be, and what the consequences would be. I would be very interested in that for the moment. But I think this will go on, but we have to be very cautious from the beginning to watch our children use ChatGPT and not to leave them alone. And if I say we, I think the parents and the teachers and society, because it's a great temptation. ChatGPT and Copilot, they're always polite. You can ask anything you want. You always get an answer by any time. And this would, if you think it in 5-10 years, we must be cautious that our children still have friends and about the human relationships, and that they keep their transversal skills.
Indeed.
And I think that was very important, Eliza, to mention that. There's the soft skills, the human skills that are very valuable. So that would be my last words.
Thank you very much. Please.
Yeah, to David's question, I think in that case the homework needs to change. I think the answer is not to take away necessarily those tools, but it's really to also make sure, because you can develop critical thinking in a digital age, and we measure, as you know, in the OECD, the skills of 15 years old in the PISA. So I think it's really, we haven't talked too much about it, but it's also the investment in the teachers. And I think that's particularly important. We're focusing very much on the students, but we need to invest in the digital skills of the teachers as well. The other thing is, perhaps we've been talking a lot, and I was just looking back at the title, about trust. And when we haven't talked also too much about data breaches. And that, of course, in an environment where AI is much more pervasive, and what that means as well for trust, which I think we need to step back a little bit. It's not just trust in AI, it's trust in institutions and trust in national government, which has been going down over the years. So at the OECD, we do this trust in institutions survey, and there we've seen that about 44% of citizens in these countries where we've looked at have either very low trust in national government. So I think it's a larger trend that we need to see AI in it, and what that means as well in terms of the impact this may have as well on adoption. Thanks.
Absolutely, thank you. You've got a little card on your table. So this is the deliberative engagement we did with the citizens last year. We're repeating it this year, but 2024 citizens, which we launched in February, and that point came through absolutely. They feel, so across those 7 markets, people felt the solutions are there. They just didn't trust the politicians to do the right thing. And it's ever thus, and it is a global trend, I think. But in Europe, loud and proud, if you read this, you hear that message time and time again, that's what people are feeling. Time is up. Thank you, lovely speakers. Thank you very much. Let's honour them in the usual way. Thank you very much. By way of conclusion, I just think that one of the messages out of this is that we can't wait and watch. And we can't leave it to somebody else. Someone's going to have to step in. Someone has to create the framework and the infrastructure to actually make sure that AI becomes a source of good rather than bad. Otherwise, the game's a bogey. And when you think about right now, in 2 sites of war, AI is determining the winners and losers of that war, whether that's in Ukraine, wherever else, or you think about what's happening in Israel and elsewhere. AI is determining the future of warfare. We know that. The other thing that we know is, are our multilateral institutions fit for AI revolution? Question. I'm not sure. Are they taking the AI dimension seriously and how it will fundamentally reshape not only intergovernmental relations, but trade and security? And I suppose we need to be thinking about that. Last 2 points on the softer end. If anybody knows about neuroscience, right, you know that from the -6 to probably 0 to 3, we have these things called synapses, millions of them in your brain. And they are imprinting your sense of self. This is how you become, you're able to smile, you acquire skills, cognitive skills. If those synapses are only relating to a phone or a mobile, think of what's going to happen to the future of our babies and children as we grow up. And my last point is, let's not forget the 70% of the people that aren't in this room. And what I mean by that is those who are materially less off than you, less opportunities than you, and feel left behind. So I think we have to have some sort of conscience about how do we make sure that those who are in the poverty trap, less socially mobile, with less opportunity around them, less social capital around them, are going to enter this new world and revolution of AI. Thank you very much. Don't leave. There's coffee, right? There's coffee there. Please stay, because we've given you a proper half hour, 20 minutes now, eaten into it, 20-minute break, so you can, let yourself go, relax, etc., get some air. But come back, because at 4 o'clock, if this was something that you enjoyed, wait for the next session, because we're going to be talking about democracy, and we have some really big, as we have here, really interesting thought leaders to discuss the impact of AI on democracy. Thank you all very much. See you at 4.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. For those of you who've stayed valiantly, thank you for coming back, and I hope you have had a bit of a rest and now ready for the second installment of our discussion around AI. I want to also welcome those of you online. If you've been with us all this time and had a break, welcome back. Those of you who are new, welcome to this conversation on the second facet of we've been discussing today. One, which is about the economic fabric of our societies. We now move to the social fabric of our societies, and it's to do with democracy. We want to talk about the implications of AI for democracy, its health, stealth, and its goodness. Whether AI will be, as we said in the earlier segment, that AI can be a force for good, but it can also be a force for bad. What we do know is unfettered, it can harm democracy. We've seen examples of that this year, last year, and before. But if it's used responsibly, it can inform people, it can empower people, and it can create social movements that can make change happen for the good. So it has that potential to be able to be that thing, that device that could ignite, inspire, influence change, but it can also do the other and the opposite and do bad. So we want to have that conversation about what do we do around that, and how do we make sure that we think through the implications, not just the here and now, because we know that AI is moving at a pace. The things that are being developed we don't really understand fully yet, and more will come about. That's what we can be absolutely certain about is that the way in which AI will operate in terms of its capabilities and speed and pace, and to get into places that we can't even imagine, is upon us and will continue to be upon us. But what we can do is be responsible citizens, leaders, politicians, and governments to make sure that we think not in the now, but into the next 10 to 20, 15 years. And in that regard, one of the things I just want to draw your attention to again is two things. This little yellow card on your table, which I meant reference to, where we've established a citizen engagement lab, if you like, a capacity. And so, as I said before, we've been in deliberative exercises with citizens in 7 key markets last year, 2024. This year we'll be in over 5 markets, in polling around just about 2,000 or more. And what we're asking them are questions about what matters to them. What are their anxieties? What are they feeling? What ideas do they have? What are their concerns? Their feelings of politicians, etc., and so forth. And what's really clear from the last cohort was that people, as I said in the last session, people feel that solutions are there. They feel that we have the capacity. They just don't trust politicians to make the right decision. And that's nothing new. And it's not something that we should be surprised by, given what's been happening in our world, in our societies over the past at least 36 months in particular. So there's something about people thinking that the institution of politics and democracy are the right things to have. They're just peopled by the wrong type of person. And people really are. So when people were encouraged to think about, would you want to get involved more? Would you like to have your say? Would you like to be involved in informing, devising, discussing policy? Majority of people in those 7 markets said yes, they would do, and they would welcome the opportunity to be engaged. And so there's a whole range of issues that came out. And so I'd encourage you to read this report, and there'll be another one coming out next year also as we repeat the exercise I said, but in 5 markets. And what we're trying to do is build a repository of citizen understanding. And the reason for that is this document, and this is the one that I've referred to before, a renewed social contract. For us, we're really clear that if policy is to be done properly, it has to be multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary, but citizen-informed. And that's what we're doing. We're walking the talk on our ideology and philosophy that we need to close the gap between what happens at the top end of policy making. We need to connect silos more effectively, bring private sector, civil society into the loop and the collaborative thinking exercise of policy change. But most importantly, don't forget, policy has an impact on you and me and the majority of world citizens out there. So why would you not make sure that they are part of designing policy? So that's our proposition. So that's what we are really clear about and want to be able to promote. And that's why we've said these are 10 choices for the current mandate. And our view is that we want to be able to establish another one of these in time for the next mandate, right up to 2030. So it's if you like, it's our guiding northern star, because we believe that a renewed social contract is the thing that we need to do. So on that, we have a really interesting panel. We have a mixture of foundations, government, entrepreneurs to think about this issue of democracy and the impact of democracy on, and AI's impact on democracy, as we say. It gives me great pleasure. Lindsay, you're here. It's great. I'm glad you were able to join us online. So you've had an illustrious career, both in the US government, and now you are the executive director, forgive me if I get it wrong, of the German Marshall Fund. So you've got a kind of really interesting background in both being in the heart of the Biden administration, but now in this iconic thing called the Marshall Fund, which was created at a time in a certain political context. And so it's really good to have you with us, because one of the things about this session is that AI sees no borders. There are no borders to it in terms of our ability to regulate it, command some attention of it, requires international governance and international collaboration on a level that we have not probably witnessed before. So I'm going to ask you a really simple question. What does AI pose as a threat? What's the biggest threats that AI poses for our democracies, from your experience so far? And thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, and it's really a pleasure to be here in this Friends of Europe forum. I think we share so many commonalities with the German Marshall Fund, which, as you mentioned, was set up as part of a gift from the German government in the spirit of the Marshall Plan as a thank you. And I think this sort of the transatlantic relationship and cohesion and building cohesion on these issues of our time, especially about how we're going to govern and derive value from new technologies like artificial intelligence without compromising or sacrificing our democratic values, and in fact advancing them, is probably one of the most important questions we could be tackling. And building that cohesion is very central to our mission as a think tank and the program I lead, which is the technology program. I think there's definitely, there are definitely some of the positive use cases of AI, and I'm happy to talk about them in a minute. But to your question on the threats, there are, of course, a spectrum of them. I think we tend to divide them into kind of the long-term, potentially these existential threats, and then more of the here and now. So the long-term, the AI-enabled bioweapons, the Terminator scenarios of AI taking over the world and forcing us all into slavery. Some of the more, I think, concrete here and now threats are around re-entrenching bias in AI systems, making decisions about government functions and financial decisions, decisions about how AI is going to impact work. I think we're all already seeing AI being used in the workplace in positive and negative ways. But the issue that we are mostly focused on in terms of the threat space when it comes to democracy is really how AI is influencing our information environment. And so this year, with 2024 being this historic election year, we've taken a focus to look at how AI is playing out across global elections, now in the United States with it kicking up. But we've been studying this question for the last year, starting with Slovakia's election in the fall of 2023, where there was the first really highly publicized deepfake audio case of the sort of not pro-Russian candidate was fakely recorded as wanting to raise the price of beer. Obviously, a very unpopular position, should it have been true, and potentially colluding with journalists to kind of rig the vote in some way and try to overcount votes. This is a theme we see in the United States when it comes to election denial. And so what we're really focused on when it comes to AI is deepfakes, audio deepfakes, visual deepfakes, images, and videos, and just the democratization of the ability to create realistic fake content. So now we're actually releasing this tracker, a map of AI in global elections next week, where we've already tracked 133 instances of deepfakes over the last year around the world related to elections that got major media coverage. And why I think this is such a threat, and it's hotly debated. There are many folks out there who would say that, well, it's not really having an impact. A lot of these things aren't that believable, and I think that there's some truth to that. It's very hard to quantify the impact of these things, but AI is entering into an already very precarious information environment. It's already so exceedingly difficult to keep track, to keep the story straight and figure out what's true and what's not. And AI is adding the visual dimension to this information environment as well. And I think that's where the existential threat to democracies particularly could be. If we can't trust our own eyes and what we see, if we get to that point where we have the same amount of doubt with what we currently have when we read, with visual information, that has implications for evidentiary processes in courts of law, where showing security camera footage, and how we perceive our political leaders and engage in political life. And lastly, I would just say that this is an area, we think a lot about the competition between autocracies and democracies, and this is an area where we have a true asymmetry as democracies, because we actually need quality information to engage in political discourse, to select our political leaders. Autocrats, they have an advantage if in a confused information environment where no one can tell what's fact, what's fiction. They thrive on the ability to kind of poison the information well. So I think that when it comes to AI specifically, that's, I think, the biggest threat is to our information environment.
This is very helpful and also deeply scary. What, in terms of what's happening right now, in that you've been obviously watching the US elections, one of the most significant in terms of shaping future world politics and relationships, if we can put it that way, depending on who gets in. How is it playing out? What are the instances you're seeing right now in terms of this? Because I can imagine it'll intensify, as you can imagine, as we get to November. What are the kind of examples you're seeing of the malign influence and use of AI?
Yeah, I think it's really going to confuse the information space. So now I think we've got 36 instances so far, just in a few months in the lead up to this election. Some of the more outlandish and perhaps but ones that folks might have heard about. Recently, there was a sort of a whole maybe contretemps about maybe between Trump and Taylor Swift about who she was going to endorse. But actually, before she made her endorsement of Harris, Trump released videos or photos, or he shared photos in which there were a couple of authentic photos of people wearing T-shirts at a rally, a political rally, that said "Swifties for Trump." Swifties, but who support Trump. And then he created, or well, not he, but someone created. He shared an AI-generated image of Taylor Swift with the Uncle Sam hat and pointing and saying, I support Trump, as if she were endorsing Trump. And then, in addition, there were also AI-generated images that were less clear of more crowds of Swifties for Trump. I don't know that anyone necessarily believed that this was a true endorsement, and I think there's a case to be made for that as one of the reasons, at least Taylor Swift says, that she actually ended up coming out and endorsing Harris, so it almost kind of backfired on Trump. But some of these images were, hard to discern, especially when they were paired with the real images from the rally, what was true and what was not. I would say that was a case where it probably backfired. We've seen less high-profile instances of AI-generated media in the electoral context. There was one instance, or the governor of Utah, there was a deep fake created of the governor of Utah, or purporting to admit to ballot fraud and getting fake signatures for his candidacy on the ballot. And he just says this right into the camera. Again, I don't think we're at the point where people are not seeing these as deep fakes and necessarily believing them as real. But this is the thing with disinformation. It puts even a cheap fake, a not AI-enabled manipulation, can kind of put a doubt in your mind, put an idea in your head, and it's very difficult to understand and quantify what effect those have. The last example I would raise goes back to this concept of the liar's dividend, that when we can't trust what's fake, we also can't trust what's real. So Trump pointed to crowd sizes a couple of weeks ago at a Harris rally where she was stepping off the plane and said, well, that's an AI-generated image, that's not real. So the ability, I think, actually to cast doubt on what's real might be perhaps more potent than some of these AI-generated images and video that experts can clearly discern at this point are fake.
Lizzie, thank you very much. There are two things I'd like you to think about for us, and not to answer right now, but I'll bring you back. One thing in the point you make about, in this room, you might assume that people are able to discern truth from reality, or fake and reality. Perhaps not when the imagery becomes so sharp. But when you think about matching visuals with commentary and audio, let's say, when you think about the 50 or 60% of folk who are in the, let's say, less capable digital divide, i.e. those with poorer literacy, poorer capabilities on AI and digitalization. This is a thread between the earlier session on economy and this one on democracy. It completely marries. And I'd like to think about, what do you do about that? And then the second point is that, is our international governance up to it? Because this could, with the way we describe it, I don't think people have, especially political leaders, have really, some that are in the ballot box are going to feel it. But once you're in power, they're going to say, we'll carry on. But there's something about being really clear that, do they have the zeitgeist of what's going on right now and the potential threat that AI poses to the future quality of our democracies? So I'm going to ask you to come think about that and come back to us whilst I go to the European Commission. Paul, very good to have you with us. And you are a principal advisor in the Director General of Justice and Consumers, so a really interesting connection to both of those elements. The Commission's been well known in terms of addressing, both with the Parliament actually on occasion where you've worked very well together, on a number of things around a slew of regulations like Digital Service Act, and the other one which eludes me is the AI Act, obviously, which is so important. Are we safer now because we have both of these things in place?
Well, I mean, democracy is a multifaceted thing, and I would say these laws are a first generation of trying to apply democracy to technology, to modern technology, beyond the traditional technology. We have a long tradition in Europe of regulating technology by law, and the digital sphere needs to get used to that it's completely normal that there is a primacy of democracy over technology. It should be the democracy which makes the rules, not the companies and not the engineers who decide how we live alone. So alone this fact, I think that democracy on this side of the Atlantic has acted is important, because it shows the relevance of democracy and that democracy can still deliver. Are we safer now? Well, let's see how these laws are implemented. It's probably fair to say that there is no other industries in which we find so many illegalities and so many court judgments which tell, Google, Apple, Microsoft, guys, you have to pay your taxes, you have to comply with competition law, you have to comply with data protection law. The spirit of disruptive innovation, unfortunately, has been overinterpreted into let's disrupt the law. And there is an attitude which, as a friend of the rule of law, I find deeply anti-democratic and unsympathetic, recently also expressed by Eric Schmidt in his advice, I think it was in Stanford or in Yale, to the students, where he said, guys, when you are in the digital economy, you just have to move on and do it, and let the lawyers clean up afterwards. So the attitude in the tech industry is deeply disrespectful of democracy. And so if we discuss about AI and whether it's a problem for democracy, we need to discuss the technology together with the narratives, and of course together with the power constellations in which this technology is produced and used. And there I would say, if we look at these three things together, these companies make it a sport to make it impossible in America, in Congress, to come to any type of legislation which has an effect. They lobby against the few laws in American states where democracy actors try to impose limits on what the companies are doing. We have seen this recently in California when it was about financing the press, how Google and others lobbied against the law, and we will see how this comes out. And of course, also in Europe, they try to soften the laws and, basically make them meaningless. And once the laws are in place, they appeal on every decision to the last instance, which is their good right under the rule of law. But it is a signal to the regulators, which is, if you take a decision which we don't like, we will fight you, and if necessary, for decades. We have the money, we can afford the lawyers. So I think if we take all this together, and then we see President Trump saying, we'll leave the climate accords of Paris, we don't need international law, technology will solve it. And we see the narrative behind AI, that AI will solve all problems of this world in the future. I think we have a persistent democracy problem beyond a good application of the DSA and the AI Act. The first step, I would say now, is that we need an ethics in industry which is changing. We need an ethics which is where the first point is, we will comply with the law. That would already be a great step forward, and I would be very, very happy if the industry which benefits and makes profits with AI makes this their ethics. And the second thing is, I would love to see a result of the American elections which makes it possible for American politics to take charge of all these challenges in their democratic way, in binding rules which also bind companies in their private operations. I think the Biden administration has done great work. They have gone as far as they can in the presidential order on AI, but because it is a presidential order, it cannot bind the private companies in their market operations. It can only bind them as far as their relation to the government is concerned, and in some areas of national security concern. So when we talk about democracy, I think it is important that America regains its leadership of democracy also domestically, and regains the power to make laws which give a frame and constrain the concentrated private power which we see in these companies, and which brings them to order, so that this technology at the root and at the core in Silicon Valley is developed from the outset to comply with democracy and fundamental rights.
Thank you. Very bold words from a civil servant in the Commission. If I may. So, to kind of paraphrase, but I want you to comment on it further, if the US doesn't follow suit, and if Trump, you've already made it clear, if Trump gets in, the game's a bogey. In terms of our ability, Europe's ability to take the lead on regulating, using rule of law, and being innovative in the policy regulation landscape, is it going to be completely always hampered because the US, if we get a different outcome, takes a different approach to regulation? Can we go it alone, is the answer?
Well, I would say this. First of all, I think also in terms of language, innovation is not something which only takes place in technology. This is what Silicon Valley tells us. But of course, innovation also takes place in society. Innovation takes place in democracy, in politics. And the rules we give ourselves as a society, the behavioral rules, if you think of COVID, well, the vaccines were very important. By the way, they came from Europe. We innovated and not America. No, I just recall it because, of course, behind this is the constant preaching to the inability of Europe to innovate, of course, completely wrong. But what I wanted to say is it's not about technology only. It's also, for example, in COVID, about the behavioral rules, the distancing, and so on. So I think, first of all, innovation means technological innovation, but also societal innovation, and internet policy and digital policy and AI policy anyway is societal policy. We cannot leave it to the experts, we cannot leave it to engineers. It concerns how we all live, and therefore it's important that we all engage on this. Will Europe be able to go it alone? Well, obviously less good than if we would do it together. That's why we love to emphasize the commonality of values, that we are we are democracies, we have our fundamental rights, we have a common history, And we always seek partners in America, in government, in civil society, in academia, and we do find them. I mean, even where the US government has lobbied against EU legislation, big parts of American civil society have written letters to European politicians and to the Commission and so on, and said, we support you because this is also good for the American people. So America is not just one block, you know, there are, even if Trump becomes president, there is the good other America, which is very big and very strong. I would say the world as a whole will suffer from President Trump. That's quite clear, and it's not only about AI. I mean, you know, a new Trump administration will be a boost to all dictators and autocrats in this world, to all extreme right-wing and maybe even extreme left-wing people. Maybe if we are very unlucky, he will be a boost to Putin, because they've been great friends in his first mandate, because they agree that human rights are nothing, and actually now probably they would agree, democracy, no, not our thing, as Trump said, you know, this will be the last elections you vote on. So I would say, you know, anybody who can participate in the American domestic discourse, has friends and so on, you know, do whatever you can to convince people not to vote for this candidate.
Wow. I have to say, it's the first time a civil servant is being that bold. It's fabulous, it's refreshing, and let's hope he's not watching. I'm sure he isn't. But that's it. Seriously, it is refreshing to hear what you are saying, because, you know, sometimes we get a mealy-mouthness about the threat that's posed, and somehow we dance about the politeness of democracy and political etiquette, and sometimes we need to call it out. So thank you for doing the calling out. The thing I want you to focus on, like I said to Lindsay, and I'm not going to ask you to answer this question right now, is that, do you think, in the context of the new mandate, in terms of what we're doing about AI, so we had a big conversation in the first session about, we understand its prowess, its capabilities reshape our societies fundamentally. Has the current president and the one who, in the new mandate, got the right focus on how AI should be worked through, and in terms of its policy structure, have we got the right priority for AI in the new structure of the priorities of the new mandate? So I'm hoping that you can be as refreshingly bold and frank in answer to that question as you have about Trump. But I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to someone who's been, you know, doing some really interesting things in terms of founding a different kind of thinking and way of working. Max, really good to have you here. And, you know, you've been doing a number of things. You could tell people what it actually is about. But I suppose where you're coming from is doing things that can safeguard democracy in the context of AI. So how do we do that? Share your wisdom.
Yes, so how to safeguard democracy in the era of AI? I mean, I guess it's a big question, and I think good answers usually include flavors of, you know, strong regulations, vigilant enforcement, and digital literacy. But you could ask also the question, is that actually enough? And I think the answer that you give to that is probably depending on how impactful you think AI will be in the next years. So I think if you, for example, think that, let's say, chatbots in 5 years will be slightly better than today, then I think maybe what we're doing right now, the actions we're taking, are probably commensurate with the expected impact of AI. However, if you think that, as Draghi puts it in this report, that we might be at the cusp of an AI revolution, I think we have to rethink whether that's enough, what we're doing. Generally, I think I need to make the point here, like, people talk a lot about generative AI. I think it was even mentioned today. I really don't like the term, I have to say. I really don't like the framing. I think it's very misleading. We actually don't care, like, that something is generated, like words, pixels, pictures, whatever. It is more important what it actually feeds into, which is general purpose AI, which is also covered in the EU AI Act, thankfully. So general purpose AI is there to actually to do a lot of different tasks in a lot of different domains, right? The general purpose property is here the important one. If you actually start thinking a little bit about what this means, and where we worked with that just a few years ago, and where we are right now, and you just extrapolate the trends, and there are clear trends, and there's a lot of evidence for that, like where this is going, then you look at that and it becomes quite more powerful. I mean, we were talking about timelines of like 5 years, 10 years, like what does it mean? I think we are, implicitly, we're all thinking a little bit of that AI doesn't change a lot. So we think we're good. But I think that's like really tricky. If we even take a look at the current developments, right? We see clear shift from AI as a tool to AI as an agent, for example, right? So you can have long-term planning, actually. We see this in the OpenAI 01 model already, right? If you have played around with that, it's like a first indication where this is going, and it actually works out. Scaling works quite well, even on different dimensions here, but I'm not going to go into details of that. Why I'm talking about this because I think we think often just going to be smarter chatbots, and I think this is not a good approach of thinking about this. It's going to be smarter, more capable general purpose AI. And I think if we look at that and going back to at the cusp of an AI revolution, then what does it mean? It probably means that we have quite a transformative impact for AI. It might be in 5 years, might be in 10 years, but it's probably coming. The trends are pointing in this direction, at least. And I think if you have this kind of transformative impact, and if you look at studies by, for example, McKinsey, and they're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar industry, there's a lot of money, it's a lot of power, and I think with this great power comes great responsibility, but also great power concentration, right? And that is in the hand of a few private actors. I mean, Pauli, you were not very shy talking about the tech sector and how disrespectful they are towards the democracy. I think this is quite a problem. If I think about how do we make sure that we actually create AI that serves the public interest and upholds democratic values, I feel like we're having a little bit of a problem. If we are in that world where development is accelerating, and we are at an AI revolution, then I think having the public sector being at the sidelines, which I think they are right now, will be a huge problem. So I think for meaningful democratic oversight, you kind of need to be in the room where AI is developed and where decisions are made in real time. We cannot just wait 5 years, right, to react to some kind of new AI developments. That's not going to work, especially when technological change is accelerating itself, right? Not only do we have more technological change now, it's just really accelerating, like day by day, year by year, right? So we really have to take this long-term perspective and think about what this means for us. How do we ensure meaningful democratic oversight in such a world? I think you need to involve the public sector. I think you need probably to go for a public-private partnership where you can combine the democratic oversight of the public sector with the development know-how of the private sector. At SEFG, we call this CERN for AI. It's basically that, a public-private partnership that is a bit ambitious. But you would actually have an entity that would try to develop AI, in trustworthy AI, in a way that has the public interest really at its core. And I don't think that is happening just per default in the private sector, right, alone. Yeah, and I think that's how we can safeguard democracy, at least in times of accelerating AI progress.
Max, great points. I think you've read this, right? Because in this, we actually, what you've just said, we say, bring the private sector in earlier in problem solving. Don't treat it simply as a transactor and deliverer of contract, because then you don't get much value. But if you can, perhaps that's a partnership that's up to range, that'd be great. If you could bring the expertise, know-how, and capacities, and the private sector invests more in R&D than governments do, why not create a different deal, a different partnership deal between public and private? And I know it sounds ugly, but it can be done differently if it's bound by a model of ethics. And as you say, the number of politicians that we've had here, or I've interviewed, who say that, great, we have the oversight, we can bring people in later, but they don't actually understand. And that's not their fault. It's not their fault. It's about having a different mindset about how you legislate and regulate on something you don't have a Scooby about, which is moving at a certain pace. So you're absolutely right. This is exactly what we're saying in here, that bring the software engineers, the entrepreneurs, tech gurus, etc., around the room with politicians and policymakers and see what kind of thing. And creating some sort of a public-private sandbox on AI would be perfect, wouldn't it? What's your reaction to that? Or you've just said that?
Yeah, I think it's not the same. So I think it has similarities. There's overlaps. I think I wouldn't go into the sandbox direction. That's like a whole different kind of box of Pandora to open. But the spirit of that is going in the same direction still. Yes. Yeah.
Your organisation is called Centre for Future Generations, right? Mm-hmm. So share with us what some of the successes or concerns you've got, so we get a better sense of what you've founded.
Yes. So, I mean, the Center for Future Generations is about the governance of emerging technology. So basically trying to have a little bit more of a long-term view on where this is going, what this means for us, right? We have different tech programs we're looking at, right? Whether it's neurotechnology, biotechnology, for example, quantum, climate interventions, or advanced AI, in my case. And I think we're trying to see how, well, it's a bit, I mean, it's the cheesy, I think, sentence that you hear often, which is, you want to mitigate the risks, but like harness the potential, basically. I mean, I think we take this seriously. We try to think a little bit about what it really means on a deep level, whether what we do, right, is actually effective to actually achieve that. And yeah, it really depends on which world you are in, right, and how quickly this technology is developing, and whether the normal cycle of traditional governance can catch up with that or not.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you also for bringing to light that thing that, and that's because you are in there, you're, advanced AI director, that the language we're using is wrong and around AI, and the fact that we need to think differently about its associated, implications, both for democracy, but the world of work and a whole range of other things. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to bring you in now. And so Sam, can you be patient just for a little while? And then I'll bring you in a moment or two. But excellent, a hand straight up. Again, yes. Who you are.
Yes, I'm Angelika Podmögli from the Committee of the Regions. I understand we talk about democracy, and now we talk about the public-private, but where do you see the role of the citizens? Because I think they are the target, and they are the ones who vote in the end, and it's so shocking what we experience now since quite some time, and you've referred to it. The extreme right is raising, and they take advantage of the technology that is there, more than any other political group or any other political party. So how does this go together? How do we prevent the trend by also looking at what the citizens are doing? Thank you.
No, thank you very much. In terms of before you put the mic down, what would you like to see happen? Because what we were talking about was very much about let's say, the producer side of AI. So you do need government and private sector to work together to make sure it's safe, ethical, just, and doesn't create negative outcomes. But the citizen dimension about how the supply of democracy, if you call it that, what's your view on that in terms of the Committee of Regions and the work you're doing? What would you like?
I cannot talk on behalf of the committee. It's
no.
a personal opinion.
Okay, your personal opinion.
Being German of origin, but living outside of Germany for quite a while now, I think still citizens want to be listened to. Yeah. At least that's what we're told when we look at the results in the elections in Eastern Germany now. And the citizens who vote, or the people who vote for the extreme right, say they are not listened to. I'm not sure whether it's right or wrong, but at least this could be a possibility. And that's what we heard, for example, that I work for the Greens, I can tell that, that from Thuringia, where they lost, where they're no longer in the parliament, they said they have such, that's the AfD, they have a strong presence in the region, in the rural areas. They are there. They were there when COVID happened. They helped the people. They went shopping for the elderly people, etc. So they are there. They're visible, and they are there to be talked to. So I think this is it may be one of the reasons why they are popular, because they are physical, present, and they listen to the people, and that's what we in principle also understand by democracy. They go and listen to the people and listen to what they need and offer them some support. I'm not sure whether it's true, but at least it would be worth an attempt to go and listen to the people and listen what are their problems and help them.
Indeed, we're on the same page. I mean, we created something, we worked with you and others actually at Eurocities about, localism, and that we need a new localism agenda in Europe. And, one of the things that you found when you spoke to political parties was that if you look at joining the dots up in the United States, United Kingdom, elsewhere, in Germany, elsewhere, the centre and the left has just been fat, lazy and complacent. They've taken for granted the vote. They haven't been local. They've forgotten the principles of what good democratic practice is. And the right are door knocking, as you say, buying vegetables and all the rest of it. And it can be as simple as that in terms of someone who feels left out will be felt as if they've got an association, because at the end of the day, people want to belong to something as well, especially when they're feeling left out. But the point that Paul was making about it doesn't matter who gets in. One of the things that was interesting during the Trump era is how mayors, so city mayors, collaborated both on the United States and Europe, and were a force for good in terms of changing things and still collaborating on a number of things. So I think we mustn't forget the power of locality and mayors, both in the United States and here, on that note. And I think that we sometimes lose sight of locality in our discussions. But if you're interested, go to our website. We produced a paper on a new localism for Europe. Sir, here.
Yes. Can I use a mic? Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Wolfgang Pape. I was with the Commission before, but I'm now some kind of a free thinker. I like very much the intervention here, because I feel we have to see democracy at different levels differently. You can have very direct democracy at local level, because people know what's happening. The higher you get, already at provincial level, we have some kind of parliament representative democracy. And then, of course, at European or even at global level, we have even more representation. And there's a problem is more and more we have a quantitative democracy, not qualitative. And I personally feel, from my own experience, that civil society should be much more involved the higher you get. The problem is how to represent them, because we think still in quantities, in numbers. We vote with majorities and minorities, and that's one of the problems. And I feel we have to overcome that the higher we get, already at European level. Even in the parliament, we have majorities, minorities, and now after the elections plays out again, which majority will come up on particular issues. We have to bring in more civil society in sectors of their knowledge. And this is particularly need at highest level, at global level. United Nations is clearly only nations. I go to the point now where I avoid the word international, because this is only between nations. I call it interpopular, because we have to see peoples connecting beyond borders. And I think in the long term, that's the only way to revitalize our democracies. So very direct democracy with numbers and all that at local level, yes. But the higher we get, we have to see other means. And I hope AI could bring new ideas and new possibilities to qualify democracy and not only quantify it.
And thank you for your new phrase of interpopular, lovely. But what would you, before you give the mic up, because you've been in institutions elsewhere, that what we know about civil society is that often funding drives effort and capacity. And we don't have, I mean, it's a marketplace. It's a marketplace, whether we like it or not, for civil society. How do we create a different kind of approach so that civil society can be strengthened to do and play the role that you're describing? What do we need to happen? Because basically people just, it's a marketplace. People compete for the latest bit of funding.
Yes, but the problem with the market is at global level, we don't have any competition policy. That's why we have the GAFAM or the BATX in China. These have monopolies on information, and democracies depends, particularly citizens, on information. And there already is a big issue. We mentioned beforehand that there is an issue that the Europeans are much more critical of antitrust policy in the US and all that. But at the global level, we don't have any policies. WTO never mentioned competition as such. There was in 1947 a proposal for some kind of GATT law, GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, to have a competition policy at global level. But Congress in the US didn't allow that. And now Washington is not interested as well, because for them, GAFAM is kind of replacing Hollywood as a soft power worldwide. They have enormous impact worldwide. And they are, dare I say, polarizing other democracies as well. So we follow the, dare I say, Anglo-Saxon system in this way.
Indeed.
So we need this precautionary principle here on the continent, at least, to see what we can do before we have the technology coming in and see that it's positive in its use.
Thank you for your wise words. Thank you very much. Gentleman there just put his hand up.
Thank you very much.
I urge some of the women in the room also to put your hands up, please.
How dare you presume my gender?
Oh my goodness, the modern trap. Go on, carry on.
I just want to say that although clearly there are factors to do with consultation...
Did you introduce yourself?
Sebastian Whitechurch-Brack from the Kofi Annan Foundation. I just want to say that although there are things like inclusion, consultation, localism, I think that one of the big factors that has derailed or eroded the legitimacy of our democratic systems has been real failures and a real economic problem with Europe, stagnation after the 2007 crisis, aging population, diminishing deindustrialization. And I'm worried that AI, we're looking at regulating AI, but the big problem with AI is that it concentrates mastery of data and creates these mega players which are going to actually limit the capacity of smaller companies, smaller people to get involved. And there I totally agree with Mr. Nemitz from the Commission, because in fact the US has not actually enforced the diversification and the limitation of monopoly powers. You've got these few companies who've been allowed to buy up all their rivals. People came up with alternative technologies who had new products. They allowed them to buy them up. And so what I'm concerned about is actually these AI companies, these big tech companies, are going to be such market leaders in data, and it'll be almost impossible to challenge their power unless they're fragmented. So my question to you is, to what extent can we hope for, let's say, a fragmentation, or I'm not sure, the word escapes me now, but the state should be asking them to break up because they're too big, in fact, to be
more
safe
intervention
for
from the
democracy.
state. I mean, stay there for a second with that, because we had this conversation earlier when I was pushing people to say, should the state have a role in this? I said in the beginning, in the first session, that when you think about the biggest share of cloud in the players in terms of foundational AI, it's US companies, probably three, owns most 68% of the cloud, and basically they're already outliers and have the largest market share. And so unpeeling that or raveling that back is a huge problem. Where do you see the intervention coming from? A multinational, multi-governance structure? Or where? Where do you see this, breaking up coming from?
I came here hoping that you would give me answers, but I don't know. I think it requires maybe something within the OECD club or something like that. But the power that they've accrued, and as you said, I think Mr. Nemitz was talking about their lobbying power in Washington, makes it very hard for them to be regulated. Is it too late? I don't know. Maybe there'll have to be a major crisis before
Absolutely.
to act.
Now, what we've learned is adversity, drives positive change sometimes, which is the sad aspect, and we saw that during COVID.
There was an incident that happened when I think it was an American software company that had a problem when it updated its latest edition, and I think 25% of the world's computers were no longer functioning for a few hours, and that
if not longer.
That highlighted how vulnerable we are to a handful of US tech companies, and that just can't be healthy, neither for our economies nor for our democracy.
No, absolutely, and that's where
Let's ask Lindsay about the legal procedures in the US to break up Google. The Department of Justice is bringing these cases. I mean, there's hope in America.
Paula, don't answer that question yet. I'll bring her in. Don't worry. I have absolutely every objective of doing that. But my answer to your question is, I think we need when you think about the example, and you think that the G7 have met, the G20 have met, the UN is meeting right now, that aspect is not on the agenda. So I think we need an overhaul of the international governance, or to create a different international governance that's really challenging and addressing the implications of digitalization and AI. But hey, who are we? But I think that's what's required on an international level, so that we're able to create focus, priority, and urgency in the debate. And at the moment, our leaders are everywhere and nowhere in terms of this particular debate. And as you say, that upgrade affected people having operations. Emergency services, access to banking, your laptop, everything we gave them. But people haven't still woken up to that reality. Gentlemen. No, the gentleman at the back, and then, yes, you. Sam, I'm coming to you, I promise.
Simon as well.
No, Sam. That's Sam.
Thanks a lot. The first question that I asked during the last session was about ontologies. And ontologies is all about philosophy, actually. And then, when we're thinking about the EU, about the Europe, we have Karl Popper. So Karl Popper, it's all about the scientific criteria. you were talking about how to review scientific publication. Here we go. Then we have Jürgen Habermas. This is how to implement those criteria into a democratic communities. And then, when we're thinking about what is feeding AI at the moment, because again, there's a lot of terminologies all around, but foundational AI, high quality AI, it's going to be fed by ontologies. And it's at this level that we need to involve people all around the world, because it's how we are describing the reality around us. So if we are not even able to agree on those terms, there is an issue. That's my first point, and it's mostly a comment. And the other one, it's, I think we have to think first about the foundation, because we're already thinking about deep fake, deep voices, etc. But citizens are hungry because, sorry for the accent,
that's
hungry,
okay,
unhappy, because they know that most of the news outlets are under the control of a few people, billionaires all around the world. They know that. And most of the time we are thinking about top-down solutions, always. Even NewsGuard. If you're familiar with this company, it's a company doing some kind of rating on the news, E, B, C, D, as the EU on the food, actually. But again, it's a top-down solution. And here, from an information point of view, we need to think about solutions that are here since years, blockchain, actually, and not making a confusion between blockchain, Bitcoin, and Ethereum. They are not the same thing. And we have that since years, and we're not doing anything with it.
Thank you very much. Thank you indeed. Gentlemen, if I can ask you to be patient and pause for a second. I promise to bring you in the next block. I really do. But I want to go to Sam because of the discussion we've just had. And you know, Sam is the executive director of Who Targets Me and co-founder of Join Together. I think it's the most appropriate point to bring you in, Sam, in terms of there's been a lot of discussion, concerns, chest beating about the impact of AI on elections in this bumper election year. Has this been well-founded, Sam, from your perspective?
So, I mean, obviously, kind of going back slightly to what Lindsay was saying at the beginning, I think it mostly hasn't, and I think the reasons for that are many. But I think a bunch of people who have stoked that fear do need to kind of reevaluate their views a bit on how elections and campaigns actually work, how the media, social media actually works. People have spent a lot of time reporting on this, researching this, and often I think creating unnecessary fear about this over the last years. I think there's been pretty much every newspaper in Europe and the US and everywhere else has run at least one long read article about how we won't be able to believe what we can see anymore. There's been loads of TV programs about it. Every single instance of a deepfake, however small it is, has been reported on, and I think people haven't been very sceptical about that and the impact of that. And I think that's drawn resources away from like real accountability work at times. So I think I'm just going to kind of run through, if I can, what I think some of those overstatements are and how the kind of hype does that. I think firstly, I think people just don't really understand how people receive and perceive communications at all. The model of AI is often talked about like it's some sort of superhero movie where the baddie kind of takes over the television station and kind of changes everyone's minds by clicking a finger. And I think lots of the reporting is kind of stoked fear in that way. We know that the way people get their information is nothing like that at all, right? Social media is very fragmented. No one is very good. Not even the biggest political campaigns in the world, the Harris campaign or the Trump campaign, are actually very good at like intentionally crossing the different boundaries of social media and TV and media and all the rest of it. They're good in one place, they're less good in others. And so narratives tend to stay quite fixed in one place, fixed amongst one community, those sorts of things. So, reaching people at that scale with these kind of persuadable messages is very, very difficult. I think the second thing is that people actually aren't as persuadable, anything like as persuadable as some of the people who talk about this stuff make out. It's been a huge overstatement. Anyone who's worked in campaigns, and I've worked in campaigns, knows that most of what you say falls on deaf ears. Most of what you say is not that creative, it's not that interesting, it's just hard work. Most people have made up their minds on most things most of the time, and I think a lot of the kind of AI kind of hype market has totally ignored that fact, and just sort of claimed that, deep fakery or fake, fake voices or whatever are going to somehow make a big difference to these sorts of things. I think the other thing is people get really annoyed when they get targeted with fake stuff. I think Lindsay already mentioned the example of Taylor Swift reacting to Donald Trump using deepfakes of her pretending to support him. There's a huge blowback effect there. That really isn't going to work out for Trump. I don't think that's going to add votes for Trump at all, having Taylor Swift come out against him because to do that. So people reject these fakers as well. If you get found doing this type of stuff, I think it's a huge problem for you. And I think that speaks to also misunderstanding politics in general and misunderstanding political organisations, right? Political campaigns really are very loud during elections. They are the people that the media pays attention to. They're the people that voters pay attention to. They have all of the channels at their disposal. They spend all of the money. And for people to vote for them, they have to actually trust them. So that, it's clearly something that campaigns themselves are not incentivised to do. Apart from in the most untrustworthy cases, right? Again, Trump comes out as being that. But you'd be insane to burn your trust with voters by spending your time creating fake things, putting them out there and then having your brand trashed in the process. So of course campaigns don't actually use this type of stuff. That leaves behind only those kind of actors that are willing to take those types of risks. And generally speaking, they're much smaller, much quieter, much more fragmented than those mainstream campaigns. And I think the last one is actually, I think, it totally misunderstands the way the media works and social media actually works. I mean, obviously the media is not as strong as it was. It's not as strong as many of us would like it to be. Social media companies are nothing like as responsible as we would like them to be, but it's not really in their interest to have an entirely post-truth world, right? If we spend our time on social media networks where everything is fake and 50%, there is a threshold at which these things become useless, and it is therefore not in their interest in the longer term to have services and offer services that are completely useless. So they do try and stop these things happening. There have been aspects of their work that do work in terms of election integrity, and again, I think that puts a blocker in the way of AI being effective. So I think there's about 4 or 5 things there that just mean that hype, from the very start was very, very overblown in terms of this year. I think there's a couple of things just to finish. One is, I'd acknowledge to some extent Max's point that technological development is still to come. I kind of question the timelines, I question the utility of some of the stuff, but I think, there is obviously the possibility that we kind of overreacted to the technology in the short term and we kind of underreacted to it in the longer term. I think there is some possibility around there. And I think you could certainly argue that 2024, in a way, came just a little bit too early as a year full of elections for AI. So, that's an argument for kind of staying vigilant. I think the second thing, though, is that we're kind of moving past the problem a little bit by talking about AI too much and we're looking at the wrong thing. And the problem we're still grappling with, actually, is one that we've now had for 10 or 15 years, which is the decline of the media and the power and scale of social media platforms. Those are the things through which people get this information. It doesn't matter whether it's AI, a selectively clipped piece of video, other sorts of disinformation, whatever. That's much less important than the structure through which people are getting this stuff. So I think we have to spend a lot more time kind of locating ourselves in actually the right sort of problem here as it affects democracy, understanding how people choose their information, how they receive that information, how they process that information, what they do once they get that information. And so, I think that's the point I want to be heard on, if I can today, is that the safeguarding democracy piece is a different problem in some ways to the sort of AI and the generative AI problem.
Sam, thank you very much. And I've been kind of listening to you very carefully. I've got a couple of things that I need to say to you. When you set out your 4 or 5 points, my question is, what about Cambridge Analytica and Brexit? So when you say the things that you've said, the power of what they did, the machinery they put together, that arguably, one might argue that what it did was prey on the malaise, the social malaise of people feeling left out, and fell into the trap of tired, worn arguments, which then blamed certain culprits, whether it's ethnic minorities, migrants, etc., and Europe in principle, for being the place that we can't have our borders back, there's too much bureaucracy, etc., and so forth, and look where it's got the UK at the moment. And there's that. The other point for me is that when you're saying that people are feeling X, Y, and Z, what people are you talking about? Are you talking about those people, as I mentioned, Lindsay, that 40 to 50, 60% are that where you've got a capability divide and a literacy divide? And when I kind of speak, when I've been into youth organizations or other let's say community-based organizations, what they're consuming is of a different nature, and when it's being hammered on constantly, there's a kind of either a you get pissed off, or a belief that this is reality. So my 2 points there are about how can we so easily forget what happened around Brexit and the power of using disinformation? And then secondly, which communities are we talking about? Because we can't use a generalist model of consuming AI and digitalization. There is an economic, material, an educational divide in its access and its use. But you can obviously disagree with me.
Yeah, and I think I will, if I
can.
In the sense that, I think the Cambridge Analytica story still remains one that is very shrouded in whether or not that had any actual effect whatsoever. I think there is a lot of snake oil around campaigning techniques. Full disclosure, I worked for a company called Blue State Digital that did political campaigning online. We thought we were pretty good at it, but we didn't move into that sort of data, that sort of world. But we were doing kind of progressive campaigns and those sorts of things. And I think our experience of doing that, and I think others' experience of doing that, is that some of that sort of data-driven aspect is significantly overblown in terms of like what's actually possible with it. Again, similarly with Brexit, I think you have, having lived in the UK at the time, there were two campaigns taking place, one of whom, leveraged issues in a way that the other one was unable to, frankly, and the Remain campaign was pretty poor, didn't do a very good job, and lost, and I don't think anyone, even in the Brexit campaign, expected to win, or particularly thought that the ways they were doing it was better than what the Remain campaign was doing. So I kind of have questions about, like, how much manipulation was involved there versus just like real politics. But the question about audiences, I think, again, is an interesting one, because it's the point. So for example, Ofcom, the UK media regulator, just put out a study the other week about media consumption during the UK general election campaign, and for the first time, social media had overtaken television as a way that people said they were consuming their news.
Yeah.
And what you have in social media is a place where, yes, there is news, although some of the companies are trying to run away from there being news. They're trying to, Facebook in particular, Meta in particular, is sort of trying to get out of that game and thinks it was a mistake to be there in the first place. That means that we're leaving these kind of news deserts for people. We're taking away this sort of, what I think lots of us hold as the kind of public media, BBC, state broadcaster type model that we thought brought a certain neutrality and balance to the environment we get, and we're just letting that disappear.
Indeed.
Among companies. My children watch Netflix, they watch Disney Plus. They never watch live TV. They never see the news. They never pick it up unless I have it on in the car and the radio. So I think these are things we need to think about. Is like, how do we create? They're talked about a lot, but like, we have to create a media ecosystem that survives the way that people actually consume information.
Indeed, it goes back to who does that, and it's a question that I asked last time: is that government or somebody else? But you make the point is that what we do understand by social media platforms and what they're doing is that they are reinventing what we understand as being news consumption. And we're in a world where everyone can be a journalist. Everyone can take a photo immediately. Everyone can report on something, and because they're in networks, it suddenly changes things. And I think that if you are going to move to reviving the neutrality of a public service. Journalism, it's going to have to revamp itself to be relevant to young generations, because young people aren't going to be going back to the BBC, unfortunately, especially the generation we were talking about that grows up on this from the age of 0 or 1 and are now 16-year-olds. Very different approach to it. But I'm going to move on. But I thought it was an interesting use of words that the Brexit people leveraged certain things and the Remainers didn't. I would say Brexit folk lied about certain things, but they were consumed readily by people, unfortunately. But we have to call a spade a spade. But thank you, very, very thoughtful commentary. What I want to do is go back to the gentleman that I said I'd ask you to wait, and yourself, and then I want to bring you back, Max, and Paul, but then Lindsay, because I hope you've had time to think about some of those questions that I posed to you. Please, sir, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Anirban Das. I am in the technology and digital economy practice at Burson. But before this month, I've always been in the public sector. I used to work at the OECD in Paris. So it's still the public sector side of my brain that's working right now in this question. I'm so glad you made me wait, because Sam's comments would make you realize the significance of the question. I just believe that we are at such a paradoxical juncture right now in terms of, the electoral health of democracies. We have made great strides in advanced technologies such as AI, of course, but as has been elaborated by some of the speakers in this session, we are walking backwards in the public sphere. National election commissions across Europe and the world have invested significant time and resources over decades for voter education. Yet threats such as AI-powered deepfakes that Lindsay talked about have undone much of the progress. As Sam has pointed out, today many electoral campaigns can't cross certain boundaries. We can't reach out to all people through these electoral campaigns. People cannot be persuaded. Voter education, the relevance of voter education seems an open question now. In this context, and I'm thinking in terms of national election commissions, yes, of course, the civil society is doing a great job in voter education among young people as well. But my question particularly pertains for governments. What can governments do in the years ahead to counter this threat to voter education, especially among the future generation, the young people? That's my question.
Thank you very much. A good point you've brought up in terms of brings back to the issue of education and schools, etc. You want to come in? Sorry. Again, do introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Sevinç Kader from European AI Hub, and I'm founder of Democracy for All initiative. Actually, I believe we ignore the elephant in the room, which is the resistance of our democratic leaders, democratic institutions, public institutions to change. I think there is a big need of change because there are different types of democracy, as the gentleman mentioned. Representative democracy, participatory democracy, direct democracy. We have to really make a decision about this. Do we continue to be stuck in representative democracy? This is definitely not people really want. They want to have a dialogue rather than a monologue. I don't think democracy is all about a monologue. Every 45 years, politicians are doing all these gorgeous campaigns and being much more interactive with people and then gone. And do we really want these 20th century style democratic institutions? Because when we look at, since the Second World War, there are two places have not been changed. First one is how our political parties and democratic institutions, including parliaments, regional authorities, etc., they have not been changed. And our classrooms, how our education system works. So what we expect then? The title is Protecting Democratic Integrity. Are we going to really protect our democracies from a technology, a revolution happening? Regardless of what we do. So it is happening. When we talk about Cambridge Analytica, actually the exact technology was used by Barack Obama. And he revolutionized the campaigning, right? Data-driven campaign. He did it for good, and Trump did it for bad. Similarly in Brexit. But in Brexit, we have to see why this happened. What was actually the mainstream politicians doing for many years to communicate better what European Union is standing for. So I believe we first need to address the change we need in the democratic institutions, how we can make our democracies much more interactive with people with the help of AI even or other transformational technologies.
Thank you both for your comments. They're well much deserved and provides an interesting inroad into this conversation. Max, I want to come back to you to respond to some of the debate, especially from Sam, but also what we've heard just now.
Yeah, I think towards the last question of can we make interaction, right, democratically more interactive, right? And can we use AI for that? I think it's quite an interesting question, and I guess it depends what kind of AI you use. I guess generally you have to, at the moment, trust whoever is developing those systems, whether they are what they do with the data, right? What kind of biases they have in those systems. We have a huge lack of transparency, right? So that's also another issue. I think it would be great to use AI, but AI that you can actually trust, right? That is safe and reliable and trustworthy in the end. I don't see this happening from the private sector at the moment. No.
Voter education?
Education. I think digital literacy is super important, right? I think it's important across the board. I think you probably have a distribution where for some it's more useful than for others, right? You have a generation that grew up with that they usually don't have a problem with that. But then I think if you would have to specialize, I probably would specialize on the people that are a little bit older and have not had a lot of experience with that, on the one hand. And of course, the very early stages, I think that's going to be really useful to actually transform how you learn that at school or even earlier. Because, well, yeah, I agree totally. Nothing has changed, right, for 100 years, basically, in the classrooms. Yeah.
But the AI could have a potential if the guardianship of it was done in the way that you described before.
Yes, with the caveat that you have still to trust it.
Okay, all right. But before you put the mic down, because we've only got 15 minutes or so left, what do you want from the new mandate of the European Commission? What, from your perspective, given you founded something, you're doing really something interesting, what conditions or policy environment do you need to enable you to grow and others like you to grow?
From the new mandate, from the new commission, 35 billion euros to create Zone for AI. I mean, that is what we're covering in our report. That's what we are talking about, to actually create trustworthy AI. That's what we calculated would be necessary. I think for that you need political will and a tiny bit of foresight to see what is coming and what else is happening, right? I mean, there has been a remark before on having monopolies on huge data sets, right? I think that's one side of the medallion. I think the other one is just compute, hardware, basically chips, right? I mean, you have huge piles of chips. Literally, Microsoft is spending $100 billion, right, on a project that they call Stargate, which is used for OpenAI only in a few years, 2 to 3 years. How do you compete with that? Well, you can't, right? We don't have any kind of private sector companies in Europe, at least, that can do anything with that. And I think we have Mistral AI, okay. Aleph Alpha from Germany, they gave up, right? Basically. So it doesn't look really great. I think if you want to do this properly, you probably need to put the money on the table.
And follow your idea. Which is a collaborative idea.
Discussion on that,
absolutely. Right? Did you use a B or an M?
B.
35 billion.
It's billion, yes. For the first 3 years.
You saw the reaction, right? But in the context of the money that's available, it's a drop in the ocean when you think about the potential return on investment in even less than 5 years, I imagine. So it is absolutely possible. You're absolutely right. Lindsay, I want to come to you. So I asked you several questions around, the kinds of capabilities issues and also governance issues, and for you to react to some of the points that were made about, and Paul provocatively said, "Okay, Lindsay, how could we pull back the power of these, global, powerful monopolies?"
Yeah, look, I think there have been certainly a lot of great points made, and I think it's encouraging to see the recent antitrust actions that we have. I would probably see it less as kind of a moralistic of pulling back the power and more as a real enforcement of some very long-standing statutes that have been on the books from the age of the robber barons. I mean, in the Google antitrust decision, the laws cited were the same statutes that were relevant in the Microsoft lawsuit from the 80s and 90s and date back to the 1920s and 1930s. So I think there's a recognition that no company is above the law, and when it comes to antitrust, and if companies are acting as monopolies, as Google was very clearly and explicitly found to be in the case of online search and some of its partnerships with iOS platforms and the like, then they should be held accountable under those laws. And I think there's a really interesting debate now about whether this kind of action actually increases competition. I think the Biden administration's theory here, and I should say that the Google antitrust decision actually might surprise people to learn that this was not an action that was originally taken under the Biden administration. This was from state attorneys general, and actually, was actually brought under the last administration. I don't think it was necessarily politically driven. But when we think about kind of the U.S. election context and what it would mean for big tech, I think the record is not as clear as we might think. We did a deep dive about a month ago into sort of what the Republican ticket would do on these major tech issues. Trump has said he would clearly scrap the AI executive order, for example. And there have been some documents that are, have unclear ties to what a Trump administration would do that would have put forth a more industry-regulated version of AI, which I think know doesn't work all that well. But then there's also, we took a close read of Project 2025 to the extent that it is representative Republican thinking, I think is, up for debate. But it was actually quite unclear on the question of big tech and antitrust and whether to increase competition by breaking up big tech. There's a lot of the Republican Party that is quite angry at big tech, probably mostly over the, what they see as censorship of, right-wing speech. But I think it is a mixed bag, so maybe it's not as clear-cut as we might think. But there is, I think, a healthy debate on whether we can do more with this effective antitrust enforcement, whether that makes our overall industry more competitive. And I think when we look back to Microsoft, some experts and legal analysts credit the Microsoft antitrust decision with kind of the birth of the modern internet and what gave rise to a company like Google itself. So I think there, on the other hand, the world would tell you, well, in order to compete internationally, we need to have all the pieces together. There are things that we can do that smaller players can't. So I don't think it's totally clear cut, but we do seem to be moving in a direction of prioritizing competition as a way forward for innovation. One thing I'd also like to pick up on that goes back to your earlier question on sort of, if I would interpret it as sort of what's the responsibility of the public here, and how can we help to discern? How can we hope to discern, particularly with images and video and even AI-generated text, what's AI and what's not? And I would say firmly that I don't think this should be a responsibility that's foisted on the public. I think we've made this mistake when it comes to cybersecurity. All of our cybersecurity provisions are on the user. It's, make sure you're doing multi-factor authentication. Make sure you don't click on that link. And, I think in the way our systems are set up with cybersecurity, there are probably not so many better answers because individuals these are kind of single points of failure in many cases. But I don't think we have to repeat the same mistakes there or the same model when it comes to discerning what's AI generated and what's not. And so we have, we're very supportive of and have a lot of work on, one potential idea in the technical realm, but of course we also need regulation that requires transparency on AI systems, both of the AI generation platforms, the open AIs, et cetera, as well as the users. And we've seen some pieces of legislation, particularly at the state level in the United States, that are requiring that. Obviously, the EU AI Act has transparency requirements, particularly when it comes to political AI. I think we'll see how that gets implemented. But on the regulatory side, I think that's where we need to go. There are also technical ideas that won't be panaceas that can help. So one effort that we're really interested in advancing is on content authenticity technologies, which embed a tamper-resistant image modification history to all images that you would take and post online, from the point of capture with a camera, if it's a real image, to when it appears in your social media feed or browser. So you could actually see how an image has been modified along the way, and if that sort of chain of custody of an image or a video has been broken. And the idea behind this, and why I think we're so excited about it, is that it's not trying necessarily to detect what's fake. Right now, the state of AI detection tools is kind of poor. They miss a lot of cases. They can't make conclusive judgments. But what if we could verify what's real, just like we do with written text when we cite our sources? We have a clear understanding of where the points in one article that we make are sourced from another piece of literature. And when we look at an academic publication, I think we have an inherent regard for the validity of the sourcing because the author shows their work. We can see where we can actually verify if we want to and go back into the article that's cited and make sure that it really is making the point that's claimed in the first article that we're reading. We need the same thing with images. We need to be able to show our work in terms of where an image comes from. And if most of the images we saw had this kind of image history on how it's developed, where it's come from, whether AI or whether from a real camera, then we would inherently spot as suspicious content and images and videos that didn't have this history. So I think there are some technical ideas we can play with in addition to the regulation so that we get to a place where we're not putting everything on the user and faulty detection tools to determine, does this image have 6 fingers? Does Trump have 3 legs in here as we're scrolling through really, really quickly?
It's a really good point you make, because it's not been raised, is that, when you zoom out, you realize that the responsibility for detecting stuff is placed on the user and not on the supplier, to a certain extent, mostly. And I think that we need to, I suppose, reverse the dynamic. And if you were to use the public policy objectives of regulation to be about do no harm, safety first, and transparency, it would tip the balance completely in terms of how regulation is formed. And it would mean that it would be the providers that would have to be responsible for making sure that it's not the consumer doing it. Or final point on international governance. We've been talking about this, and it's been raised that the current models don't even think about what's going on in AI. So the UN, they've had a big conversation this weekend, but has AI featured? No. World Trade Organization, is it really talking about the implications of AI and digitalization on world trade in the future? No. So what's your view in terms of some sort of international governance mechanism for the future? Fly a kite if you haven't thought about it.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, it's something I've thought a great deal about, and it seems like, on the one hand, many of our existing institutions, may not be fit for purpose in a number of ways, whether it's AI or other new technologies or other geopolitical reality that they have to confront. On the other hand, maybe I'm a little bit of a cynic when it comes to, everyone under the tent and let's do something, really consequential. I think there might actually be value in starting in some of these smaller organizations and having a slightly more of a piecemeal approach, at least initially. I think, like any good startup would tell you, you can't try to boil the ocean all at once. You have to go after the minimum viable product. You have to start small, prototype, and iterate. And I think time and again we've seen, institutions like the UN, if they come out with something that everyone has to sign up to, it's going to be the most generic version of the statement. And I'm not saying we don't need some of that. We, especially when it comes to international human rights, we need to be very clear that the UN Declaration of Human Rights can be applied in the AI era and that all countries should be respecting that. But I think we have to be very careful that we don't end up with empty words that end up putting kind of a rubber stamp on activity that very well could violate those human rights using AI.
Very well said, absolutely. When you think about COP as an example, big tent approach hasn't really given us measurable, tangible outcomes and results. And I think you're right, and it goes back to some of the points you're making, is that we need to kind of smaller collaborative practices that bring public and private together in a meaningful way. Sam, do you want to have kind of 30 seconds, 60 seconds in terms of what you want to say? In response, you don't have to, but I want to bring you in just in case you've got something in your head or a gut that you want to express.
Yeah, I suppose even on that last point, right, we are, in the end, talking about politics and choices, right? When we talk about AI, we talk about it so generically that it almost means nothing in some sense. This kind of idea, it's just have this sort of cross-swathe impact on everything. I think there are a bunch of topics that people raise with AI that feel like sort of, lost leaders for what's possible right now. So people, it's going to have massive impact on healthcare. It's going to have, it's going to fix agriculture, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. None of those things are really happening just that much at this point. And I think, where we place our efforts, how much choice we put into each of those things, those are political choices. So I would like to see, and I don't think you can do that at the global level. I don't think you can do that even at the national level. You do that within political institutions and organizations, within everything, right? A political party should have its sense of like, okay, here's where we think AI will help the greater good and our vision of the good life and all the rest of it. And so I think what I would like to see a lot more of is people actually expressing what they think their goals and their values and the ways they think people can live good lives would actually be, and then saying, okay, well, this is how we might actually apply AI to make those sorts of things happen. I think we're very kind of backward sometimes in this conversation, where we're talking about the big technology and all of the like vague possible things that might happen, and we're not being specific about how we want to actually live our lives as human beings and what we want this thing to achieve for us.
Thanks for reminding that sense of discipline. Very, very, very helpful. Last but not least, I'm going to go to you, Paul. Hopefully you're going to raise the rafters with your boldness and your capabilities to call a spade a spade. My question to you is that has the current Commission's plan, what she's unveiled, Ursula von der Leyen's unveiled in terms of the kind of overarching priorities, has she got it right on AI and digitalization?
Yeah, as I said, as first generation of rules, we will see how they are going to be enforced and how effective they are, but there remains a lot of work, and many of the root causes relating to democracy and AI actually have to do something with the profiling of people, with these huge profiles which contain 1,000 or 1,500 parameters, which are held by Facebook and by Alphabet, Google, and by some other dealers of addresses and so on, and which contain all our behavior, all our dreams for every one of us. And these profiles combined with AI, which optimizes targeting, which gets you in the moment when you are susceptible to do certain things, which manipulates us, which manipulates societies, these profiles are a problem in terms of competition, because those who have these profiles, they make 80% of the money of online advertisement. It's two companies, Facebook and Google, while our press goes down the drain. The free press, the media, lose all this income. And on the other hand, there is no freedom with these profiles being in the world. So I think a part of the discussion of AI must be the discussion about data protection and privacy. Sam Cooke very recently made this very clear in a Washington Post interview, where he said we cannot develop further AI without having very good data privacy and data protection rules. And so I would say one of the discussions which is now before us in the common mandate, how do we get rid of these overarching profiles in the hands of the big AI companies? Is GDPR enforcement enough? Then it's okay. If it's not enough, we need very simple and clear legislation which says you are not allowed to hold these profiles. And in this way, I think the trust in AI can raise enormously, because then AI actually can focus on the really important things in terms of developing science and so on, rather than manipulating individuals and society. Thank you.
Before you didn't answer my question actually. In the sense of justice and your portfolio is justice and consumer affairs, right? To a certain extent. Okay, the regulatory pieces, you're right. You were so right to say that actually they've let that's Ursula on the phone, I imagine, saying, what are you saying? Don't say it. How do you ensure that you've got the regulatory piece, but what the Draghi piece was saying is that you could be more agile, reduce a bit of administration, work differently with the private sector in scaling up some of these ideas that actually, rather than going to the United States or elsewhere, we could keep at home to a certain extent, without using the unveiling of the Made in America type of slogan that we saw last night, which is ugly slightly to a certain extent. That is the policy agenda focused enough to make sure that we can be more agile and less siloed in the approach to digitalization and the impact of AI?
Well, we will have to see how the new composition of portfolios in the Commission now plays out. We will have more actors, more commissioners and vice presidents involved in digitalization, startups, industrial policy, democracy, fundamental rights. Is it possible to regulate an extremely complex world of technology and extremely complex business models in a simple way? I don't think so. I think we have to be realistic. The complexity doesn't come in the first place from the law. It comes from these incredibly intransparent, incredibly powerful, incredibly money-producing technologies and business models. And the political majorities which we have, mean that we have to make very complicated compromises which are induced by business. It is business who comes here and makes it all very complicated, because the more it's complicated, the more difficult it is to apply the law afterwards to them. So, don't complain to the Commission if the law is complicated. Complain to the lobbyists who want to see their business models reflected in the law, and on some occasions also complain to the 27 member states who always have great ideas to add on to the law which the Commission has already proposed.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. That's it. I hope you've enjoyed the ride. I hope you found this at least provoking some thought, or you've learned something new, or that you found the debate interesting, interactive. Let us know. We've got a chap in a grey suit who's going to come in and interview and say, well, did you find that any of that helpful? But can I just say, let's thank this fabulous group of people in the usual way. Thank you, online and present. Really. Well, I mean, this debate will continue, and that sounds so naff, but I don't mean to. I think that we do need to make sure that we keep a hold of it, don't let it go, and make sure there's that sense of public accountability around it, if we can, because to not do so is to consign ourselves to a really horrible future, and I hope that's not the case. So take care, all of you. Keep an eye on our website for our next instalment, and I have to do this, if you're not a member, become a member of Friends of Europe. But what I would say to all of you is keep it, have a look at the citizens' report as well as the 10 policy choices. I just hope that they give you some sense of inspiration or thought, or challenge it. But this is what we've done with hundreds of people to come up with 10 policy choices for a new social contract. Thank you all very much. Be safe. Take care.